have a long agenda with us. We're going to have, I know that a couple members indicated they'll be running late because of budget issues, and so rather than just have everybody here look at each other for a while, I thought we can get going on those items that don't require vote. Mr. Hang, is that okay with you? Everybody else, I know that we don't have senators present, but we won't take action without them.
Mr. Chair, just noticing the on-time caucuses again.
I can't comment on that. I lose on that one today. Sorry. Even the administration folks are not all here, so. But the chair is here, though. Let the record show. All right. We won't. We can establish a quorum, but once you go ahead and take the roll call, those are present, and then we'll acknowledge that we do not have a quorum, and then we'll move on those items that we can move on.
Senator Lowenthal, Senator Hancock, Senator Runner, here. Assemblymember Brownlee, Assemblymember Buchanan, Assemblymember Hagman,
Here.
Scott Harvey, Kathleen Moore,
Here.
Lynn Green,
Here.
Pedro Reyes.
Here.
I'll leave it open.
Thank you. We do like a quorum. So why don't we go ahead and move, and Ms. Silverman, if you can guide me through this rough waters for now. But I think that we can move on to the executive officer report.
That's correct. Draw your attention to tab 3. We wanted to share 6 items tonight, and one of them is obviously speaks to the success of priorities of funding. Again, wanted to update the board as of the February apportionments that did go out to represented $87 million in projects. We actually had a 100% success rate in that priority round, which is great. Our last fund release request came in yesterday. But overall, the success of the priority of funding, all the apportionments that we provided in December, January, and February, that actually summed over $1.6 billion, and that represented 488 projects. Again, the success rate translates to over 99.92%. But those projects came in, one project didn't meet the certification deadline or had some challenges with that, and so that item will be brought forward to the board for discussion and appeal. Again, priorities of funding just translates to a success. The second item is the seismic mitigation program update. The subcommittee met for the 3rd time on May 18th. That was just Wednesday of last week. Actually had a very long discussion, and the recommendations are part of the agenda. The third item is to share with the board the priorities in funding cash management discussion. There was a 4th meeting actually held on May 17th, which was last Tuesday. Again, also included...
Would you give me a minute so we can establish quorum?
Sure.
Mr. Harvey just joined us.
Scott Harvey.
Guess I'm here, yes.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Please continue, sir.
Sure. So, again, we actually had a meeting last week for that cash management discussion, and so with that, the agenda, we also include some recommendations from the subcommittee. The 4th item is to share is the assistant executive officer vacancy, actually posted last Friday, and so with that, the final filing date is June 20th. We actually published our job search announcements were put on EdJoin, which is a California public education job search website. Also will be posted on CASBO, which is the California Association of School Business Officials, the Coalition of Adequate School Housing, and the Capital Morning Report. I think there was also maybe additional publications we are also politely maybe seeking. So with that...
If I can, I wanted to thank the chair of the Personnel Subcommittee, Ms. Moore, who responded to a suggestion I made, which was to be more aggressive in seeking out online opportunities, knowing that in this day and age that may be a more preferred solution for some of the other generations and the kind of folk that we're hoping to attract. So I hope that you are aggressive in putting them on a number of them.
We took your suggestion, and the HR is researching that and providing us with the best online areas that we will advertise it in as well, coming probably later this week as well. So yes, thank you for the suggestion, and we're open to any more that people have in terms of creating a wide advertising and a wide deep field.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll look forward to posting those additional websites as well. The fifth item is to share is our July meeting date. As a result of some of the discussions with the Personnel Committee and obviously trying to aggressively follow a pattern of potentially bringing a viable candidate to the State Allocation Board in July, there is a proposal, since we're having challenges with trying to establish a quorum in late July, is to move the meeting up by a couple weeks. So with that, is just sharing with the board to some extent that we have a move date with the July meeting to July 12th, which is a Tuesday.
So this will serve to announce at a board meeting that we'll move the July meeting to July 12th.
That's correct.
So we don't need to take any vote or action. This is just recorded in the minutes, is my understanding, right? Thank you.
Yeah, we will also, to be determined, is the timing and obviously the location of that
Right.
meeting. The last item to share is our Labor Compliance Program Regulations update. Just to share with the members that the Office of Administrative Law had recently notified us that the regulations were disapproved on two bases, the emergency criteria, and also they wanted to have some clarifying language. So with that, staff will be working with the Office of Administrative Law to clarify the language, however, also resubmit those regs on a non-emergency basis. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Okay. So since the board took action before asking you to work with OAL on emergency regulations for those issues, unless I hear objection, we'll take it as a request by the board to work with the Office of Administrative Law on those regulations and come up with a date that's appropriate to make that happen. Thank you.
Definitely do that.
Thank you.
So if you want to go back to the minutes.
Let's go back to the minutes. Although the minutes included a request by Ms. Hancock, who's not here, I'd like to have clarification from her on what she intended. But
We can move on to the consent agenda if you like.
yeah, let's go to the consent agenda.
Tab 4.
Thank you.
Consent agenda is ready for your approval.
Mr. Hagman moves the consent agenda. Mr. Harvey seconds. Any comments? Yes? No? Any comments from the public on the consent agenda or anything we've done so far? Thank you. Moved in second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstains? Ayes have it. Thank you.
Tab 5 is, we're going to do the financial section of the agenda, is, again, update to the board as far as how we are liquidating the cash from the various bond sales. Again, in March 2009, this board actually did receive $528 million. The funds that are being released for the month of April actually were zero, so we still have over $70,000 in bond proceeds in that particular category. In the general obligation bond that we received in April 2009, this program did receive over $1.4 billion. There was actually no disbursements again this month in that category, and so the balance of the bond proceeds is $64 million. The last chart item on your page is October 2009 and November 2009. This program received over $500 million, and we released actually $10.2 million this month in the month of April, and that leaves a bond proceed balance of $75.2 million. Direct your attention to page 116. Top of your page, general obligation bond received for this program in November and December was $111 million. No bonds were dispersed this month, and so we still have a balance of $27.5 million. In March 2010, this program received over $1.3 billion, and we did disperse some funds as of April, $19.9 million, and that still leaves a balance of $193.7 million. And again, that money is as a result of the 18-month requirement. And then in lower categories, November 2010, we received nearly $1.5 billion in bond proceeds. We dispersed $93.8 million, $140 million still exist. But again, it speaks to the priorities in funding in which those allocations, we're still processing those fund releases. So imagine by next month, the amounts will be down to zero,
Okay.
with the exception of one project. So for the total month of April, we actually dispersed $123.9 million. And on page 118, again, this is just a snapshot of time, just looking at our cash balances. We still have $500 million reflected as of April 29th. Again, those amounts would be just liquidated quite aggressively in the green category, which represents the November 2010 bond category. And then on page 119, again, a new chart we presented a few months ago, and as far as folks are tracking as far as how many rescissions are down the pipeline and how many projects does that represent. And so here's a bar chart that basically explains that we still have $345 million in projects committed, and some of those represents a high amount represents in October the 18-month timeline. So there's $189 million with the 18-month requirements that is actually still have time to come in for those projects. So with that, I'll open up to any questions.
Mr. Harvey.
Just a quick question. Do you know at this point the status of the one project that is still languishing? It was on the 90-day time frame. Those were projects that were supposedly shovel-ready, ready to go. They made certain affirmations to that effect. Do you know what's at risk here?
We do have that one project that I mentioned, but it was actually in an earlier cycle. It was in the April round, and so that project is going to be subject to an appeal that's going to be brought forward to the board. So out of all the certifications, again, a majority of those projects did come in. So again, very high success rate.
I should have acknowledged that we had a high percentage, but I was troubled to see we had one, only because of all the promises made about I'm ready to go. But I guess there are extenuating circumstances, and we'll hear about it on the appeal, perhaps.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tab 6.
Tab 6.
Status of funds. Again, just a reflection of what's provided in the consent agenda as far as your unfunded approvals this month. In the top category on page 120 is a reflection of Proposition 1D and the original allocation of $7.3 billion. There's actually 24 projects in the consent agenda that represents modernization, and so with the consent approval, we are authorizing $46.4 million of unfunded approval for this agenda. And then in the middle category represents Proposition 55, which is $10 billion authorized by the voters. Again, with the approvals provided to consent agenda, $9.7 million of unfunded approvals for new construction represents 6 projects that are tucked in the consent agenda. So in total for the school facility program this month, we processed 30 projects for $56.1 million. And on page 121, in your middle category, represents the emergency repair program. We actually processed $50 million in projects this month, and that represents 108 projects. And so that reflects the total cash need for the emergency repair program of $438.2 million. And on page 122, again, the charts. We show activity in the charts actually this month is to reflect the preliminary apportionments that we took forward as far as the reflected on the unfunded list. So some of the categories did move from not being accounted for before now to be activated on the unfunded list. So with that, there is movement in the charter program and also reflected on the environmental hardship. So there's 63.3% of those projects on Proposition 1D have been apportioned. We still have a significant amount of projects on the unfunded list, represents over $1.1 billion for Proposition 1D, and that's 15%, over 50% of the bond authority. And 21% of the bond authority still remains in Proposition 1D, which is over $1.5 billion. And Prop 55 on page 123, the voters authorized $10 billion. 88.2% of that have been dispersed as far as apportionments are concerned, and we still have 8.3% represented on the unfunded approval list, and remaining bond authority for Proposition 55 is $355.9 million, or 3.5%. Prop 47, 98.5% of the bond authority has been apportioned. We still have $118.8 million sitting on the unfunded list, which is about 1%, and we have just a fraction of 0.5%, $57 million of bond authority left in Proposition 47. And then we have on page 125 tracking of the new construction bond authority. We still have actually $504 million, over $504 million in bond authority left in new construction. That represents 3.4% of the bond authority authorized by Proposition 1D, 55, and 47. And then the last chart, we wanted to reflect the emergency repair program. Again, we're tracking the projects that we've been providing unfunded approvals. So we still have 18% of remaining settlement authority, 18.4 million in remaining settlement authority, and so we'll be exhausting that next month with the projects we'll be bringing forward.
Okay.
And with that, I'll open it to any questions.
Any questions from board members? Is there any public comment on either of the reports? May I have a motion to acknowledge receipt of the reports? Moved in second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions? I have it. Thank you. On the appeals, FARMERSVILLE Unified?
Tab 7, beginning on page 127, includes an appeal submitted by the FARMERSVILLE Unified School District, which is located in Tulare County. The district is requesting funding for their Freedom Elementary School, Hester Elementary School, and Snowden Elementary School projects. There are really two main issues with this appeal. The first deals with the OPSC receive date and processing timelines for Snowden Elementary. The second involves the OPSC receive date for a certification to participate in the second priority and funding round for Hester and Freedom Elementary. In regards to the first issue, the district submitted a modernization funding application back in May of 2009. The district had also received financial hardship pre-approval for this project. Financial hardship status is granted for a total of 6 months. Unfortunately, back then, the OPSC had longer processing times. When staff performed their analysis, we realized that the application had they didn't meet the requirements to submit to request the pupil grants that's required by regulation. They had to withdraw to increase the pupil grants as required by regulation. Unfortunately, the withdrawal and resubmittal was after the 6 months that the financial hardship approval was good for, so it triggered another financial hardship review. It delayed the processing of the application. In total, it took about 18 months to get an unfunded approval for this project. They ultimately received an unfunded approval at the February 22nd, 2011 board. If staff had notified the district sooner that there was a problem with the application and they had to withdraw and resubmit, it could have been within the 6 months financial hardship period. So we do recognize that we did delay the project, and we do agree that the project should maintain their original receive date of May 19th, May 14, 2009, and a corresponding unfunded approval date of January 2010. So in that issue, staff agrees with the district's appeal, and we recommend that the board grant the original receive date and the unfunded approval date of January 2010.
Hold on.
Yes.
Board members, does anybody have any questions on this issue? I'd like to bifurcate the two.
I'll move that.
Move that piece, okay. Moved in second. Unless I have an objection, we'll go with unanimous for those present. Thank you.
The second issue deals with the OPSC receive date for a certification letter for the district to participate in the second priority and funding round. The district had submitted certifications letter to participate in the first priority funding round. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough cash to fund the projects. So the district, they submitted their certification letter on Thursday, November 4th. The 30-day filing period for the second round was due on Monday, November 8th. Unfortunately, we didn't receive it until Wednesday, November 10th.
Excuse me, when they submitted or
I'm sorry, they postmarked. They mailed it on November 4th, Thursday, November 4th. Thank you. So Thursday, they postmarked the certification letter. Monday was the deadline, November 8th. OPSC received it on Wednesday, November 10th. Because it was 2 days after the final filing period, we didn't allow this project to participate in the second priority and funding round. Thereby, they were ineligible for the last cash that was made available. We fully understand the importance of these filing periods. We did have staff check all throughout the day. In fact, we even had staff go out there after 5 o'clock to make sure that we captured all of these certifications because, again, we know how critical these filing deadlines are. But in this case, we didn't receive it until Wednesday, November 10th. It's always been our past policy to go by OPSC receive date for these filing deadlines. At that point, we didn't have the regulations, didn't state that they had to be physically received. The board did approve regulations at the beginning of this year to clarify this regulation. However, before that, it's always been our past practice to go with the OPSC receive date, and that's the reason why we didn't allow them to participate. We also sent school districts separate email announcements. We had a notification in our building blocks publication, and we had information posted on our website about the filing deadlines. The district is concerned that they postmarked the application. They thought in time to get here by the 8th. Unfortunately, it wasn't received by that time. There's also some language from the district that we have as part of the appeal that they think that a more lenient process should be established, such as email notifications. That hasn't been our past practice. That's something that we can take a look at in the future, but because it hasn't been our past practice, we didn't allow it for this particular project. Another fact that I wanted to mention is that we received a total of 174 districts submitted certifications for the second filing round for about 623 projects. This was the second. There was a total of 2 districts that didn't submit it within the filing period. This is one of them. We do believe it was unfortunate that, again, they couldn't submit it on time. However, we were being consistent with our past policy to only accept certifications within a filing period. That is why we are recommending that the board deny the district's appeal request. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Is there anybody from the district here, or anybody that wants to come forward and...
Good evening. My name is Janet Jones. I'm superintendent of FARMERSVILLE Unified School District. I've been with FARMERSVILLE for 25 years, 17 as superintendent. This is my director of maintenance, operations, transportation, and facilities, Raymond Navarro. Raymond has served in that capacity for 32 years. We're a very small district. We're grassroots, and we have our consultant, Ken Reynolds. We appreciate the fact that you're listening to our appeal. In 25 years, we've never had a postmark deadline. We're 200 miles one way from FARMERSVILLE to Sacramento, and on the date that my secretary postmarked that, I actually sent something to New York to my father, and he got it within 2 days. So it's kind of amazing that it would take from November 4th to the 10th to get here, but we're disadvantaged for that. And then we applied for the first priority. We didn't get it because there wasn't enough funds. Then the second one, the post date. And then the third priority, we weren't allowed to apply because they went off the list from the second. So it's a series of mishaps, and I guess it's a sob story from us, but we've been in this process since '06, waiting for our projects to be funded. I think we've been fairly patient with the district waiting for our projects. It's just...
See, and another issue is the 18-month delay relating to the hardship application. If things would have fallen into order and things been done in a timely manner, we wouldn't be here today. We would have hit our projects and completed our projects before the state of the economy took a dump. We wouldn't have even had to apply for the shovel-ready program because our projects basically would have been completed. But it just seems like there was one event after another. Applications were sitting someplace to be reviewed under hardship, and nothing was moving. And when we checked, we would always be told that, there's change in staff, there's certain issues going on, and we understand that. Everybody's affected by the economy, but it just seems like there's been one event after another, and when we filed for the second priority round, it was a mishap with the Postal Department, and that was the bottom line on that.
Mr. Buchanan, you had a question, Mr. Henry?
We agree with you that it was our mistake on the hardship, which is why we approved that. Are these projects related?
Yes, they're all the same projects.
They're different schools, though, right?
Yes.
So they're different applications?
Yes, there was a total of 6 applications that went in when we filed for hardship.
Okay. Are there any dates that we use on any of our forms or whatever, or our list, that are anything but actual receive date?
No, it's all based on receive date.
Because on the one hand, I have sympathy, but if you mail something, say on a Thursday afternoon, I don't know how you guarantee that it gets somewhere by Monday, and I don't know, how long was the filing period?
30 days.
The filing period was 30 days, so if you didn't get in the first round, it seemed to me that the prudent thing would have been to turn around and mail it in right away for the second round. And now we've distributed the funds, so I don't know where we get the funds. If they were to turn around and resubmit this in the next round, which is when we would have money, would they be able to, would they qualify for that round?
Right now, the district, where they're on the unfunded list, is we would need about $180 million in cash to get to their projects.
So
With the new date.
with the new date, so it's very highly likely that if they filed for the next round. The problem I have is that, to my knowledge, it's always been based on receive date, and I don't know how you ever guarantee that a post office, like I said, if you mail something on a Thursday, that you can guarantee that it'll get there on a Monday. I can remember driving up, a distinguished school application one time that a school had just to make sure that it got received and stamped. And it seems to me that if we go now to saying we're going to go with a stamp date, then we're opening up a big can of worms for all kinds of applications, when in fact the prudent thing for you to do is we're going to, we'll probably soon be opening up the next round for you to get your application in on a timely manner and get funded, because that's where you would be, irrespective of the action on this appeal.
Thank you, Mr. Buchanan. Mr. Hagman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Buchanan said most of my comments as well. I just, the past, when I've been on different boards and commissions, it's always been, 5 o'clock deadline at a certain date, and if we even had potentially legal exposure, if you went past something more that wasn't stated. And in this particular instance, too, when we have funding by receive date and qualifications, maybe I'm not on the other side of the application, what would be the reason not to put it out at the very beginning, or put it overnight mail, Federal Express or something, just to make sure that, because I understand we fund them as they qualify and as we receive them as well, correct?
That's correct.
So,
We have our email was November, the letter was November 1st to us.
There you go.
I think Mr. Hagman's point, though, is if you're down to the wire, you're much better off overnighting it, or at least picking up the phone on a Monday morning, making sure it's in, because I don't know when there ever is a guarantee in the mail that something arrives.
And you put so much time and effort into these things, and I really have sympathy. A number of times when we put out RFP for different proposals, and put hours and weeks and hundreds of man hours into it, and then they don't bring them out copies, and it sounds very bureaucratic, and I hate that because I'm anti-bureaucratic up here, trying to keep things more practical. But you do have outside parameters that you must perform within, otherwise you expose the whole process into legal challenges, and when you start talking about big dollars one with the other. So I know we got scolded pretty well from our attorneys back in the county level, that once you set parameters, you're going to have to kind of follow them, unless you can show fault on your own side, because otherwise you expose yourself to any other case out there as well. I would definitely hope and encourage to once we get this next round out, get some money back in. I mean, unfortunately, if we ruled it to right now, we have no money to give you. So if we can encourage you to maybe get it in the first day it opens up and try to get you on that next list when we do have money, they probably serve the same kind of purpose.
Excuse me. And I did call when I found out that we did not get funded, and I asked, is it a mistake sending it direct mail, or should we use priority mail, overnight mail? And the response was that, you can send it priority mail, you can send it overnight mail. It doesn't really make a difference. It's all depending if someone gets their physical hands on it and stamps it. Now, how can we be assured that is going to happen?
Mr. Hackman?
I was going to say, a lot of cases, in our case back in my other commissions, we had a lot of people hand deliver it and physically get a copy. We had register receipt where they received it, so you had some evidence or proof, that type of thing. We put a lot of faith, and you put obviously a lot of effort into these applications, and very frustratingly going through 3 years of waiting to get money for a project you should have got probably funded in the first round, that they have all that effort go through and put all that faith in the postal man or the sorting person or whatever the case may be when it gets there. Unfortunately, I would definitely suggest get someone else so you could actually track and do a number for the future. And I feel real bad too, but I know there's other cases of folks that were received after the date as well. And I think once we start a precedent of doing one, then we may have to open up for others as well, even though how sympathetic we may be.
Any additional comments?
If I may, Mr. Chair, we did the right thing on the first item, on the date for the financial hardship application. It's with a heavy heart that I am going to move the staff recommendation on the second item, denying the district's request for the reasons stated by my colleagues.
Is there a second? Second. Ms. Hancock seconds. All in favor of staff recommendation to deny? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we go back to tab 2, the minutes? Ms. Hancock, we were waiting for you on the minutes. We have, at the last meeting, you asked staff to prepare a report on the High Performance Incentive Grant Program, and the board went along with your request because it's a high priority issue, and we asked that we place it on a 9-day workload, and we now have it scheduled for August. But I'd like to get clarification because staff got further clarification on what it is you wanted. And so your request was originally for the High Performance Incentive Grant Program, but your staff later called the staff and wanted additional details. So I want to make sure we capture what it is you want, and as a board, we support your request.
Thank you. I actually don't have the minutes in my board packet. It says they will be forthcoming, but I guess I didn't get them.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm not honestly sure where they are. At this point, they're on page 5.
Page 5.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to know how much money we have given out.
Okay.
What projects we have approved.
Okay.
How many applications we have received.
Okay.
And from where.
Okay.
And how many projects are on the list to move forward so that we'll know if we're succeeding in our outreach or if we need to undertake additional outreach.
Okay. Does anybody wish to add any more to that list of items for staff to bring back to us? I just want to make sure that we as a board act in giving direction to staff of what it is we want. So without any objection, that'll be the order of the board then, to request staff to give that. Is that enough detail for staff? Okay. Okay. Thank you. With that, do I have a motion for approval of the minutes? Move, Mr. Hagman moves, Mr. Buchanan seconds. Any comments? Any comments from the public on the minutes? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions, I have it. Thank you. Getting back on the course.
Tab 8.
Tab 8, thank you.
Tab 8.
I asked for that,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'll move all those, but I would like to say I have to abstain from the very last one because I have an employee who may have a conflict with that. So, but I'll move the tab 8 action item.
Second.
Moved in second. Any questions, comments from?
I will move the last item, too, I guess.
Okay. You lost me in moving the last.
Can you I second it. Can you just recuse?
You're recusing yourself.
Just recuse yourself on the last item.
an employee who's actually tied in that school district, it's not with me, just be safe.
Okay.
That last one, whatever happens.
He's recusing
Motion
himself.
second, he's
Right, he's
recusing.
accusing himself. Thank you, and the record will reflect that. Thank you
It's
so
just chafy. Just chafy.
much. Okay, thank you. Any comments from the public? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Ayes have it. Thank you, with one recusal. Okay. Tab 9.
Yes.
You're gonna...
Good afternoon, I'm Tracy Sharp.
Mr. Chair, we've been through this a couple of times. I'll be happy to move it as from staff recommended on
Okay,
tab
Mr.
9.
Hagman moves.
Second.
Okay.
Mr. Harvey seconds. Any comments or questions? Any comments from the public?
The recommendation is the direction from the board. In your motion to include the OPSC as an exception.
Can we amend your your motion to include the OPSC as an item on exceptions to rule?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
That was intended. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we will move as such. We have comments. Comments from the public.
Thank you. Lyle Smoot, Los Angeles Unified. My comment is on the last item. We would rather see OPSC go through either their board member or the chair to ask for a removal. Don't see a need to have another way for OPSC to remove an item from the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This actually helps the district, so I like it the way it is. All right, so all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Ayes have it. Thank you. Item 10.
Tab 10 is just to advise the board that there is actually bond authority available in career tech education, and so although we did close a last filing round in October 2010, there's $29.4 million of projects that came back via rescissions in the second round. So we do have bond authority available, and so just wanted to share with the board, at the October round closing, we actually had been oversubscribed. We actually had $135 million in requests for 97 applications. So the question before the board is, would they like to declare the third funding cycle still open and use those projects to be available for funding with respect to the bond authority, or the second decision is declare the filing round closed and open up a fourth cycle. So again, reevaluating those applicants again through CDE, Department of Education, and then again have a scoring and ranking, and then come back to the Office of Public School Construction for funding.
I move option 1.
Yeah, I second that. Don't see any point to go through we've just been through it to put us through the work again.
Mr. Hagman?
Thank you. I do agree with the process, but I'm thinking about our last appellate who missed one funding cycle, but then a new funding cycle was up, but they couldn't because they're on the first list, they got a second list. For those who may fall through the cracks on those, is there a way to get them back at different funding cycles? Or would that even matter in this case? Different piles?
It's a different file, right,
file,
because we actually have projects that were returned back as far as being available for funding for those projects. And it's just bond authority we're talking about,
Yeah,
it's not
that's right.
cash.
Yeah, cash.
Can I just ask a clarifying, and then we'll, I'm sure, want to hear of it. If we close the cycle, that means that we're only going to apportion this 29, or not, use this bond authority, and then if any more comes back, we're going to open it back up to another filing round. And I would caution us on that, because this list, there's a substantial list. They've been through CDE. We actually think, because it was a third filing round, they have the highest scrutiny and scoring that went on at the Department of Ed, we would recommend not closing it if additional authority comes through and continue to go down the list.
That'll be option one.
But they say, and close the funding cycle.
So you want to leave it open, which I think that...
I would. Why close that option out?
We can augment. If that's a motion, we can augment that.
A motion's been made, so would they accept an amendment?
Accept amendment.
Accept the amendment, and so the motion would read how, Ms. Silverman?
To leave the filing round open.
Okay, so now close the cycle.
Yeah.
And now close the cycle. Lyle?
Thank you. Lyle Smoot, Los Angeles Unified again. By the way, that action is fine. We just have a question. We were the last project on the unfunded approvals list, and as sometimes happens, you ran out of money halfway through the project for the unfunding. I just wanted to make sure that in this action, we will, since it was an unfunded, not an apportionment, we will get the balance of that project put in the unfunded list.
You're saying you had a haircut. Did you have a haircut with your CT project?
Yeah, sure.
My recollection is that you're willing to take a reduced level of funding for that.
Different projects, sir.
I'm kidding. I think to the extent...
I thought it was for everything.
I think my recollection is that we did not have full funds for your program at the time, and you were willing to accept that, but that makes sense. To the extent that additional resources come back and can make you whole, that seems to be reasonable.
Because it was an unfunded approval.
Got it.
If it had been an apportionment, then we understood.
I'm with you.
Good,
Okay.
thanks.
All right. Any other comments? Vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Ayes have it. Thank you. 11.
Tab 11, beginning on page 144, is a conceptual approval for a facility hardship submitted by Marysville Joint Unified School District for their Alicia Intermediate School site. The request is to abandon and replace the site facilities due to several health and safety issues, namely the proximity to a natural gas pipeline, proximity to a non-commercial airport, and the presence of underground tanks and toxic soil conditions. The first issue we'll discuss is the presence of the pipeline that is located on the front of the property line and is within 50 feet of the buildings. The pipeline is a 16-inch pipeline with a 600 pounds per square inch, or PSI pressure. The district did submit an engineer's report stating that an accidental rupture could result in jet fire that would cause the front of the buildings to be on fire instantly. Mitigation measures would require the facilities to be moved back at least 380 feet. That is the case with all these facility hardships. We do require a governmental concurrence to take a look at the engineer's report and to provide the concurrence that there is a health and safety. The school district, OPSC staff, CDE staff have all tried to locate the appropriate governmental entity to provide that level of concurrence, but we have been unable to do so. In the past, we used the Department of Conservation. They've been the agency that have provided these letter of concurrences. However, the staff person that provided that letter no longer works for the department. They retired, and there isn't anybody else in the department that would grant the letter. So we've been trying to find another agency that would be willing to provide the level of concurrence. We haven't been able to find any. The district did receive a letter from the University of California at Berkeley Center for Catastrophic Risk Management. Although technically they're not a governmental agency, they do have expertise and did concur with the engineer's report. We also took a look at the fact pattern with this pipeline issue and compared it to other facility hardship pipeline issues that the board has approved before. We do believe that they are similar to other approvals that the board has granted, given the nature of the diameter of the pipeline, the pressure, and the proximity to the buildings. It is for these main reasons that the staff is recommending a conceptual approval for the site as a conceptual approval. The site also has other health and safety issues. Again, the close proximity to the airport. If the school were to be moved back, they would be closer to the airport. There's also the potential to have toxics in the soils. There would require further study to determine the extent of the cleanup costs for the sites, for the toxics, as the site was formerly a military base. But The main issue that we looked at was a pipeline issue, and based on the engineer's report and the UC Berkeley concurrence letter, we are recommending that the board grant the request for conceptual approval. This would be an abandonment and replacement. The district would be abandoning this site, replacing in a different school site. The recommendation is to also provide a maximum of 596 pupil grants, which is just the way we determine funding for these kind of cases. It would be a total of $15.7 million, 7.8 state share. These are estimated costs. Again, this is a conceptual. Districts would have to go out and get the plans approved. We would adjust accordingly later.
Mr. Hagman.
Thank you. I've also reviewed the point. It looks like they did an awful lot of due diligence to try to get that secondary source and cannot do it. I'll move the staff recommendations at this point.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second. John second.
Okay, Ms. Buchanan seconds.
And just to clarify, Mr. Chair, the last recommendation is because, again, in this case, we didn't have the letter of concurrence from a governmental agency, that we would seek board's direction as far as establishing guidelines for future pipeline issues to determine if there is no governmental concurrence, what could we use to give us that comfort level.
So, Mr.
And that's
Hagman,
part of the
I understand
recommendations.
the motion is from 1 through 8 for you, and then we can discuss number 9. Any comments from other board members? Any comments from the public on 1 through 8?
I have comments, but I'm ready. 1 through 8.
Page 148.
Recommendations.
1 through 8. Recommendations 1 through 8, and then number 9 is actually a little bit more conversation.
Right.
Okay? We have comments from the public on recommendations 1 through 8. Please step forward. And it's been moved in second. The long microphone is the one that people in the back want to hear you.
Good afternoon. My name is Gay Todd, and I'm the superintendent of Marysville Joint Unified School District. And back in 2005, we began an initial study of our facilities. We have 23 schools that span 70 miles, and we were in the middle of the housing boom. So we were aware that we were going to be building some new schools, and we wanted to look at our aging facilities to see what else we needed to do. So we undertook a rather massive 10-year master facilities plan project. And when we got to the Alicia site, there were the reports that had been mentioned that came to our attention, which were disturbing at best. And when we looked at how we would go about mitigating those concerns for health and safety, it became obvious that we can move the buildings back. 2/3 of the buildings would have to be moved to the back of the site. But then you're going to have other issues with cleaning up the toxic chemicals and whatever we might find or uncover as we begin our various studies for getting the site approved. The board did take my recommendation to heart. We moved the students out of that campus because of the health and safety issues. We brought in 18 relocatable classrooms to our only other middle school in that geographic area. And we have been aggressively pursuing another site in which to build the new Alicia Middle School. We were very successful in passing 2 bonds. Thank you to our communities. The first one was in June of '06 for $37 million. Our second one followed closely after that, November of 2008, for $47 million. We do have the funding available to do our 50%, and we are hoping that you will be willing to support our application for a facility hardship.
Thank you. Ms. Moore, do you have a question or concern? Comment?
Comments. Hello. Hello. I just want to provide the board with some context and to some items to think about, and it may fall more into item number 10 of the report. But I think we should be aware of these, and I believe the district presents a compelling case as to why we should, maybe that it's no longer feasible for a school at that site. However, just contextually, we have, on all other pipeline abandonments, the pipeline has been on the site. And this is the first time we are abandoning a pipeline that is in the street adjacent to the site, as I understand it. In Ed Code, districts are prohibited from siting now with a pipeline on the site. However, there is no education code that says, that has any recommendations about siting adjacent to a pipeline. Hence, we have a pipeline protocol that's part of our regulatory scheme. And that pipeline protocol indicates that when a school district sites within 1,500 feet of a pipeline, it's prohibited unless you provide us with a risk analysis that meets certain criteria. It is in place for the reason of site selection. It was not conceived of for abandonment. And so I just want the board to be aware there are probably many school sites that are adjacent to pipelines in California, and that this is the first time we're taking an action on a pipeline that is in the street adjacent to a school site. The other public policy issue to me is, what is the action then for other schools that could be located adjacent to the same pipeline? Do we then say we should notify those schools? They should be doing their own due diligence on this? Obviously, this district has come forward with their own analyses. And then finally, we do have a conundrum of not having a Division of State Architect, a Department of Education, a state-level agency to oversee, an engineering report, because there is subjectivity to engineering reports. Not saying that there was any miscalculation here, just saying that is an important component, and they went, it's not their problem, it's our problem as a state, that we no longer have that, and we did have it at one time. So that, to me, is the contextual environment that we should be very careful about the precedent nature setting of this, that there are other projects that could very well come forward, many possibly, because we cited in California, many before we ever had this protocol in place. And even with the protocol, there are projects that are adjacent to sites, or that are adjacent to pipelines, because the pipeline risk analysis said it was okay, or they mitigated the risk to an acceptable level.
I think that item 9 addresses the issue of what kind of guidelines we want to do going forward. I don't think that we're going to be in a position where we're going to tell school districts, go out there and find out. I mean, we're not doing a very good job at the seismic retrofitting needs. I don't think we want to take on the second burden, since we're not doing that well in the first one, and God knows that the needs are there. But I think as districts come forward and can make a compelling case to this board, I think we need to listen to that issue. If we've taken the action now that we don't do siting, and the school districts does their own assessment of where they are, we need to consider that on a case-by-case basis, or that's what we're doing now, and I think the staff is asking us, what are the guidelines, so that we don't deal on a case-by-case basis. I'm not sure that we will be able to give that kind of guideline right now to staff. I think for number 9, I know that 1 through 8 has been moved, but we want to talk about 9 here in this conversation. I think that staff has to do some more research on what are the issues and what scenarios we have, because I'm not the expert in this area, and with all due respect to my colleagues up here on the dais, I'm not sure that we're qualified to set those guidelines and set the direction. So I think the direction is back to you folks folks and tell us what we ought to be looking, tell us what kind of risk, and follow the direction of the Department of Education, who doesn't allow the signage now. What is it, how is that criteria established, and how that impacts those school districts that have now been built? And maybe some sort of educational may be appropriate. I don't know, bring that stuff forward to us. So I, for one, am ready to vote aye on 1 through 8, but on 9, I want you guys to do more homework and bring it to us on what we ought to be doing. But that's just one board member. Mr. Hagman.
Mr. Chair, I'll amend my motion to include number 9, to send back to staff for the report. But my understanding, too, just a backup comment, is there is some section of California Code of Regulations within 1,500 feet of the easement. And obviously, as our science gets better and our knowledge of how things work, either through earthquakes or soil, and we built these schools from 50, 60, 70 years ago, we're going to come up with issues like this. And my personal feeling on these things is hopefully we hire staff to give them freedom, but still some kind of guidance in order to make subjective and objective decisions on which ones kind of meet the criteria. We'll get more in that in the seismic one, too. But I like your recommendation, let them go back and bring some more experts up to testify on what those things should be and how many are we looking at, what kind of can of worms we're opening at that point.
Ms. Buchanan, then Ms.
I guess I think I agree with everyone here, because in a way we're saying the same thing, but I think this case, I think it's not correct to assume that the only reason we would be voting for this is because of its proximity to the natural gas pipeline, because you also have the situation where on the one side you've got a pipeline, on the other side you've got an airport, you've got soils conditions. So when I take a look at the cumulative effect of all of those and the fact that it seems to be agreed that students had to be moved from the campus, it seems to me that the weight of all these factors combined say that it meets our criteria for approval. Past that, I hope we can come up with some objective criteria, but we know from all of our lengthy discussions on seismic, it really is difficult to try and fit every school in just a nice little box.
Senator Hancock.
Thank you. I actually would like to deal with the part of the dilemma which had to do with no state agency would issue a letter approving essentially the engineering report and saying that this was something we should move forward with. And in this case, Mr. Chairman, I would think that we perhaps as a board should ask the administration to designate one state department to do this, or contract with the UC risk assessment people who did finally send the letter for Marysville. But going on a wild goose chase looking for somebody who's willing to send a letter of confirmation for an engineering report seems like inefficient.
In the administration, we are looking at the administration. I think folks in front of us are part of the Department of General Services. Are you suggesting that the Office of School Construction go out and see they can come up with somebody? When you say the administration, I just want to be clear who we're talking about.
I was really thinking the only person that I know that has the ability to direct a state agency to do anything is the governor.
Okay.
We could go right to the governor's office and ask, and they could ask direction from somebody. To me, it was unusual to find that they had to look so far and so long to get a confirmation letter.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, that could be part of the staff's recommendations. If, do we make this an in-house government department to try to go through, or is there a private sector equivalent worth of level of expertise that they get, two separate independent quotes from, or something like that?
I think
that would be something the staff could work on.
I think that could be part number 9, that have the staff come up and see if there's somebody at some level that could be a consistent resource for other school districts, so they don't have to go we've learned from your experience that there's nobody out there, but I think as part of the discussion number 9, as the Chief Deputy Director of Finance, I'm kind of hard-pressed to go tell the governor what he has to do. So I'd rather have it as staff kind of looking to see what kind of, and they're still representing the administration since they are part of the executive branch. I'm much more comfortable with that, for one.
Okay.
Mr. Harvey.
A final comment, perhaps, on this due diligence. Staff report says the Department of Conservation California Geological Survey at one time held that responsibility. As departments in these lean times are beginning to define what their mission-critical activities are, I assume it would be a proper gesture to ask them if they intend to do this in the future. Just because someone retired doesn't mean that they're not going to go through the process of replacing that person at some point. That's where it has always resided. I would hope we would start there and then fall back on whether or not there is another appropriate state entity, or perhaps, as Senator Hancock has suggested, doing more due diligence on this UC Berkeley Center. That seems to have a nexus, and I think it's close enough to being a governmental entity. It's part of the UC system. So I would kind of track it in that fashion.
Mr. Mireles.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. There's one other thing that I needed to clarify. There was another component to the appeal that the district recently withdrew, which dealt with the eligibility for modernization that was generated at the Alicia Intermediate. We had a recommendation that we removed because of the district's withdrawal, but we do want to include another recommendation, that is to zero out the modernization eligibility at the Alicia Intermediate.
That sounds reasonable. Mr. Hagman, would you accept that as part of your motion? So we have the motion of basically 1 through 9 inclusive of that, or 1 through 8, and then 10 inclusive of that, and then number 9 that we give the staff direction that we provided has been seconded. Without objection, can we make that unanimous? Thank you. Unanimous of those present and voting. All right. Thank you much. Seismic mitigation program. Another 3 minutes conversation on that, I'm sure. Okay, so we have, why don't you start us off, Ms. Matt?
If I may, point of personal privilege, I'd like to bring some new information to the table. It doesn't directly relate to what the committee's action was per se, but it affects I think the efficacy and the ability to keep momentum in this program. What I mean by that is, you may remember the Seismic Safety Commission was kind enough to give us $200,000, which removed one of the obstacles districts faced, which was this evaluation part of qualifying for the dollars. We've got contractors out there, we've gotten projects funded, that no longer is an issue. The commission was kind enough to say, yeah, you've got a little bit of a surplus left, some $70,000. Why don't you zero it out so that we can get more of these evaluations done? And then staff took the time to say, why don't you give us $50,000 more if you have it, because that would increase again the number of school districts we can qualify in this program. It's come to my attention that the Commission feels so strongly about having a certain kind of objective criteria, and we'll hear about it in the staff presentation, one that recognizes a shake zone and steps it down, one that adds building categories to the qualification. They feel so strongly about those two criteria that they have told OPSC staff, if you do something different than that, we are going to reconsider whether or not we'll give you the additional $50,000. So to me, I want to know a little bit more about what happens, what not having that $50,000 may do to the momentum in our program. I think it's something we should know about as we take action on this item. So it's not directly in the item, but it's connected to the success of this program.
Can I ask a question? So, Mr. Harvey, in other words, you're saying the commission would prefer the language that's on page 158, that we reduce the shaking factor and add a few add 2 additional building types?
Correct. When you hear the staff presentation, you'll learn that the Seismic Safety Commission was part of a stakeholder group that came up with that recommendation, and they are tied to it. They identify with it. They think it is the best evaluative tool. I don't want to speak for them. I'll let staff make the presentation.
But if we should go with those recommendations, we would get the additional money and we can move even faster on getting the money out?
Well, let me say it again.
That's a compelling argument.
Also, reconsideration doesn't necessarily mean denial, but they do want to take a new look at whether or not having criteria that's different than they recommended would mean they'd like the dollars, the additional dollars committed. That I can say for certainty. We put the $50,000 at risk.
Yeah.
I apologize, I had to take a quick break. Would you explain the $50,000 you're talking about putting at risk out of the $200 million we're trying to spend?
It's not that $200 million.
Right.
The $50,000 is an add-on to the $200,000 we got as a grant from the Seismic Safety Commission, which is doing some evaluative structural qualification work for us. It's something the districts don't have to pay for.
But they're not. It's not doing structural work for you. I think that's the first thing we have to clarify, because what and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but was it AB or SB 300, correct? That AB 300 that asked, because the seismic money wasn't being spent, that asked that we come up with a list of schools or districts that might potentially have buildings that would be eligible for seismic safety dollars, okay? And the original list that we came up with was by taking a look at geological maps to show districts or schools that might fall in that area, and based on records we have, the building type, because they had to be Category 2 building type, correct? Okay. And within that, we had narrowed it. So based on the best information we had, we said, if you have this shaking factor and these building types within Category 2, those would be the most critical, because the original intent of the money was to get the money to the most critical buildings, right? Okay. So we had a program in place that went into effect in 2006. And here we are in 2011, and we've had 3 projects qualify, and only qualify by the fact that we took the original shaking standard and we lowered it, correct? So now, please indulge me. So now, we said, look, we wanted to spend this money on schools that needed seismic repair, and clearly it's not coming out, so how can we find more schools that qualify? And that's where we took and allocated this money for you to go out and help find the schools. Now, we admit that that list is imperfect at best, because originally when it was started, I know from the school district where I was on the board, there were schools on that list where they had been completely torn down and replaced 5 years ago. And now I know you've been updating those records even more. But all that list is a list of schools that might qualify. Those schools still have to go out and do engineering reports and go through the entire process to be able to qualify for those funds. So all that is a list. I mean, strictly, all that. And so then we got into the question of, what does this shaking number really mean? And what is a safe shaking number? And the report that you provided us for one of our meetings was, we think this number is the right number. You know, the engineers couldn't say if you lowered the number that really made a difference in terms of trying to measure the safety of the building. And we also got into the discussion that while some of those factors might be good for giving you a glimpse at, 10,000 feet looking at the entire state of California, it doesn't get into how we deal with specific conditions for specific schools. And we heard testimonies from people like Piedmont, of which I know Senator Hancock, you're very familiar, where they actually had a shaking factor in excess, but because the building wasn't the right type, and their engineers said by far it was the least safest building, couldn't qualify for the funds. So when we took a look at all of that, it was what I suggested, and it was, we can relook at this, but the proposal at the time we adopted, that if you have a situation where an engineer on site, they've done, and I happen to be the school gym in my school district was the first district that qualified, San Juan High, where we lowered it and it dealt with sticking with liquefaction, where you've gone through and you've done engineering reports and soils engineering and all of that, and they say the building's not safe for students to be occupied, and you have DSA concurrence, and we agreed DSA concurrence should be based on some objective material, but not holding to one standard, only meeting both, taking a look at it. Then if it's not safe for students to be in that school, why isn't that a critical need, and why shouldn't that school then be replaced? So that's why we came up with those, with the different criteria. And I actually believe that using that criteria, you are more likely to have schools begin to qualify for this money than just by continuing to add schools to a list. Because we've had the list, and clearly, if it were that easy, we would have spent most of the $200 million by now. So that's my...
Okay, before we start, and my goal was to, first of all, thank staff for putting this tab together and the following tab in such short time frames. There have been a lot of meetings that have been going on, a lot of notes taken. So I just want to publicly thank you for, I have not been to the seismic, and this is the way I've been keeping abreast of what's going on. But I've been to the cash management one and priorities and funding, and I know there's a lot of information, there's a lot of testimony going on. So I just want to say thank you for putting this stuff and including it in the report. It was just short timeline. So anyhow, anybody else want to comment on this? Ms. Hancock, do you have any interest on this issue? I think you know a little bit about it.
I'm just, I'm interested in getting as many schools to qualify and getting the money spent as soon as possible. The way we do it, I think all the ways that have been laid out, and I'd like to thank the staff as well, because they spent a long time talking with me and others about it. But I was interested in the incremental approach that was talked about that might allow us also to have smaller projects where there were roof tiles or hanging lights that needed to be fixed, but where you might not require a complete rebuilding of a school. I happened to be down looking at schools for the U.S. Department of Education right after the Northridge earthquake, and one of the scariest things were some of the hanging overhead lights that had fallen. Fortunately, there were no children in the building because it took place in the middle of the night. But I do think those small details do matter. I was very impressed with Mr. Harvey's statement about the money that we might have to move projects faster. So I would be willing to look at taking the two recommendations on page 158 and asking the subcommittee if they would consider adding provisions for an incremental approach for smaller projects, and also perhaps a separate way of looking at schools that come in with engineering reports that say there's an imminent threat of collapse. It might encompass what the subcommittee recommended and what is on page 158.
Okay. Ms. Buchanan?
I believe the recommendation already encompasses that, because we're asking for an engineering report from the site, which we need, and we have agreed that that DSA staff can, first of all, the buildings have to be category type 2, which would include these new types, and we're not going to just start out at one shaking factor and lower it, till we find enough that apply. But they are able then to consider a lower shaking standard than the 1.68. based on an evaluation of whether or not these buildings are safe to house students. So I think we've given maximum flexibility there in the proposal.
Mr. Hackman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to back up a little bit. I know the purpose of this board is to try to most efficiently get what the will of the voters was, the bond money out to the schools that need it. I want to go back to the need. We can't put everything in boxes. This state is too diverse with too many different climate zones, too much different building materials, all the rest of it, to put everything categorized. I'd like to give, again, back to my original statement, as much flexibility to the staff to have a much better chance of looking through detail, relying on expert reports, state or private otherwise, to look at and come up and bring recommendations to us and an argument for funding something or the other. If we start bringing criteria down solely for the purpose of sending out funds to basically make work, I think that may be almost fiscally irresponsible. I'm okay with funding something that need. I don't want to just lower the rates just because we don't have enough schools applying. If there's schools that have this issue, they have concerns about, like we had that one a few months ago that did not fit the criteria, they were able to bring it to us, make a compelling argument to us that say, hey, we don't fit your square box right now, but we feel real nervous about this school potentially have a problem with a major earthquake. We would like to have funds. I think I'd like to set up a process for that. But if I go to all my school districts now and say, well, the state officially has declared that from one level to the lower level now, if you're in that shaking zone, your school could fall down. I just can't imagine what all the parents would come and do to every school board member in the state, saying now we're just opening up a huge can of worms that every state, no, what about, nervousness for those students in those classes and potential liability suits. The state declares now you may be in a seismic zone that we don't have the money to replace all of them now. We need to look at these things on a case-by-case basis. To have some science there as guidelines is great. But just artificially bring it down because we're not spending money fast enough, this seems, this is the public's money, we're paying interest on it over 30 years. We want to make sure we do so based on science and need. And I think a lot of times, and the staff can correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of school districts that do qualify haven't came up forward, maybe because they don't have the money internally to help do some of the steps they need to do to get the grants from us. I would be much more concerned about fixing those schools under the greatest need and maybe figuring out how we can help them that process along if they don't have internal funds for that, versus just opening it up to bigger and bigger fields to find out who has the money or the time or the inclination to go out and apply for these funds based on just arbitrary numbers. I want to see the science behind it, basically.
Ms. Moore.
Well, as a subcommittee, we did consider, I think, what the senator asked, and that was the ground shaking and the types of buildings. And we, I think, I can address what you're asking about as well, Assembly Member, and that is that an engineer has to say there's a potential for catastrophic collapse. So that's a pretty high standard, and as a school district that has to address that issue and pay for 50% of that project, we believed that this, as a subcommittee, unanimously, that moving down incrementally was not getting to the real issue, and the real issue was catastrophic collapse. And so we felt strongly that by revising our criteria in this manner, it doesn't mean that there isn't science associated with it. The Division of State Architect has to agree with the engineer's report, and they have to, I would assume, be doing that engineer's report in a manner that's acceptable engineering work. So that was the approach that the board took, and it wasn't necessarily, in my mind, and other subcommittee members could speak, it wasn't, let's get the money out. It's, let's get it to those that have the catastrophic collapse potential.
But did we fully fund everything on the first list or category? We haven't yet, right? All those schools have not been addressed because they may not have the 50% the match, or may not have the engineer money to go out and get an engineer, may not be knowledgeable that they're sitting on a quake, for all I know. That's what I'm saying. You should focus maybe doing as much outreach and maybe even do the criteria. If they're the worst of the state, because they're on fault lines, and there's a reason why you picked that number to begin with, a certain cutoff level and certain building type, because that was the worst of the worst. But we have yet to address all those throughout the state, maybe because, again, the school district does not have the funds to do it. I think we should look at maybe how do we support them and either give them more funds or being less of the by the apple for them, because those, what you're saying is, those, when we first made this criteria, are the most potential chance of hurting a student at that level. But since they didn't apply, we're going to make a bigger pot and let other people apply. Well, those hopefully are still the worst schools that we're looking at. We should be able to adjust them some other way. I don't know if there is.
I think your concern and your the idea about the fact that maybe why some are not coming forward is the 50% requirement. We investigated that as a subcommittee and have been advised legally we cannot reduce that. So that factor is not going to change over time. And the other factor, however, that we continuously heard from school district as to why perhaps there weren't more coming forward was interim housing. And on a 2-1 vote, the subcommittee recommended that we include interim housing. So that is a way that we were hoping that we could broaden those projects that are qualified to come in. And having sat here with other members of the board for the last 5 years, that we have not been successful in addressing the seismic issue. It was the subcommittee's, I think, best effort to address that. Obviously, the board can have their, it will go forward for a board vote, but I'm ready to remove the staff recommendations, inclusive of with a couple of revisions that I think make it easier. It's on page 154, the recommendations. They are A through D. I would, on number 1, it must contain a building with any Category 2 construction type as defined. I would say not listed, because I think some people might confuse if you were listed in the 300 report, but it's the Category 2 as defined in the Assembly Bill 300. And then on item C, where it says, in the second line, has a potential for catastrophic collapse in a seismic event. Probably that defines it better to say this is a catastrophic collapse in a seismic event. And I would add item E to allow interim housing as recommended by the subcommittee and as qualified by the staff, the different ways that that you'd have, the different things that you'd have to go through before that was ever granted. And then I would add F to direct staff to come back with conforming regulations.
Okay, so I hate to do this, Mr. Chair, but when I wrote my report on E earlier on the interim housing, there were a lot of different variables in that, and I'm not sure if there was there was recommendations from the committee for interim housing globally. Then I know staff was putting on some recommendations like need, they couldn't move them around, a whole bunch of other criteria. We don't have that here. I'm just wondering if that would be prudent to put it off for, I hate to put it off again, we put this off for months.
We can bifurcate that and come up with something else.
Besides the interim housing, and then bring that back with a full list of what the recommendations are.
They would have to bring back conforming regulations that specify that.
Okay, good.
So we would have another opportunity to review that and say whether that was an up or down on those regulations, I think, because we should have those. We had them in subcommittee, and it is inclusive of that subcommittee discussion. And I think the intent there was that you had to do everything possible in your district to house the students in existing structures, and if you didn't have that capacity, then we would consider it for interim housing.
I would second that. I would just like to respond to Mr. Hagman for just a couple items. One is there is really no list. We have a list of schools that may fall within certain seismic areas, but there really isn't a list of schools that are in danger of collapse, because we don't, unless you can afford to, and the state can't afford to do this, go out and do the engineering reports and analysis on each school. We can't do that. It's up to the school boards, really, and district superintendents to, that they're really responsible for the facilities in their districts. We provide funding to help them move forward with new construction, modernization, in this case, seismic retrofits or replacements. But I looked at this as a former school board member. I can remember when we had to abandon the San Ramon High Gym, the architect said, this isn't safe for kids. And we replaced it after we qualified for the funding, but I couldn't allow students and staff to be in that gym knowing that there might be a collapse. And I can remember another situation. That was the Moronga situation that was brought to us, where the engineers said, this school isn't safe, and we actually concurred that the school wasn't safe, but it didn't technically meet one of the qualifications. So I can't think of a higher need than a school not being safe to be occupied as a result of a seismic condition. And that's why we moved in this direction rather than trying to have schools meet a strict requirement of a 1.68 or a 1.65 or a 1.58 shaking factor or specific building type, because too often it's a combination of factors that result in that school not being safe as a result of a seismic event.
Okay. What I find interesting is that the board has gone through the whole discussion, thanks to Mr. Harvey kicking it off, without having a report from staff. And so I'm not sure if the board needs a report from staff or not, but I do have some questions. Mr. Ferguson, you look like you want to say a couple of things, so.
Sure. Chris Ferguson, Department of Finance. The Department of Finance supports the incremental option in terms of adjusting the spectral acceleration rate over time downward to capture the most vulnerable facilities in this state. In other words, we would be repairing the most vulnerable on an incremental basis. We agreed that we could add additional construction to Category 2 construction type schools that were listed report. We believe that the Seismic Safety Commission has identified this as the experts as the best approach to this program. To the extent that we do something, that this board takes an action contrary to what the experts are saying, we would be going away from what the scientific experts have recommended to us. In terms of interim housing, we believe...
Hold on, though. Go back, though. I mean, one of the items here is that you would have a structural engineer's report identifying the building deficiencies and reasoning for concluding the building has potential catastrophic collapse in the seismic event.
And we recognize that, and I understand that. In terms of what the Seismic Safety Commission presented to us, though, you would not necessarily be addressing the most vulnerable facilities first if you were to take that approach. You would be addressing any facility that came forward with an engineering report, regardless of the vulnerability, which is the charge in the statutes that directs this program, that this program was designed to address the most vulnerable facilities in the state.
Could you please explain to me how a school that engineers say is not safe to be occupied, where the board members are forced then to evacuate that school and put the students on another campus, how that does not meet a most vulnerable qualification?
I believe what I'm supporting here is what the Seismic Safety Commission presented to us as the experts in this area.
Well, when I read all the reports, I read that as saying, these criteria are would be one way of identifying the most vulnerable, which is why they assigned those numbers. The reality is we have $200 million we've had for 5 years. We're not getting the money out to schools. There are schools that engineers have said, and even staff has concurred, have said, are in danger of collapse as a result of seismic activity, where the school boards have then evacuated the students from those schools, and we're saying they don't qualify. That's the problem I have, if we accept that criteria.
If you look at page 154 on staff comments, we're asking DSA to grant concurrence with structural engineers' report. In the process, they'll draft a policy guideline that specifies the standards of acceptable reporting. One report we asked for was ASC E31, which is an evaluative report, evaluation type of set of requirements, but we've now also asked for ASCE. Senator Hancock requested 41, which is much more stringent, is not evaluative, it's actually addressing these things.
Where are you reading 41? I don't know.
Right here.
That's 31.
41, she's adding.
Oh, you're adding the 41 be added.
Senator Hancock has already added 41 in, and so the question is...
She hasn't.
She hasn't yet.
I'm sorry. She was going to.
Okay. Make sure we capture the right motion.
Okay. Since staff comments are suggesting that DSA would come back with actual standards, they might take into consideration what you're saying. So to stop us from moving forward and not accept that we've already got an intermediate step here in terms of standards, would you agree that DOF might be satisfied simply because DSA would come back with standards that you would be interested in? They would look at all of them and come back.
And that's something we'd have to look at. I think ultimately our position is based on the scientific evidence that was presented by the Safety Commission, the Seismic Safety Commission. Effectively, we were told that the spectral acceleration rate and the Category 2 construction type were the predominant risk factors that a school site faced in making those decisions. That's why we support this incremental spectral acceleration adjustment.
Okay, but we're already listing Category 2. Is it not correct that the 1.68 would still be in there?
What we're really asking is that we allow them to use more than one criteria to evaluate the safety, because if all you want is this line, my belief is we're going to be right back where we started several years down the road, when we have schools that they're coming to us that are not safe to be occupied. So I don't think it should be a bright line. I think it should be criteria that they consider in whether or not they concur with the structural engineers report from the school district.
Okay, who has just joined you? Could you identify yourself, please?
Yes, thank you. I'm Gary McGavin. I'm a member of the California Seismic Safety Commission. By the way, I was the architect of record for the Landers Elementary School. That was about 0.4 of a mile away from 8 to 12 foot of horizontal offset.
Okay.
And I'm here for any questions that you might have, or unless you want me to talk.
I would like you to comment on the recommendations of the committee of A through D for now. On page 154.
With respect to increasing the Category 2, we're in full agreement with that. We believe that this will open up some of the vulnerable buildings. With respect to the spectral acceleration, we are... Say again?
Is it part of the recommendation?
No. No. Okay. No. Okay. B, obviously, the staff and students.
Let me seek clarification. Let me ask a question. Does the spectral acceleration and the other factors stay in, or when we talk, Ms. Buchanan, about factors, right now is a bright line. You have to have the 1.68, you have to have this type of category. do we do away with those things, or do they stay in the backdrop as one of them in addition to this other stuff? How they mingle if they do?
Well, I thought what we said is that I'm a school district, and I have a school, and the engineers say it's not safe to be occupied by students. So I submit, a request to DSA saying we want to replace the building or whatever. We apply for the application. I give you the engineering report. Then it's up to DSA to evaluate that. And what I thought we asked them to do was take a look at the criteria, but also take a look at the engineer's report and decide if they concur with the report or not. And I'll bring you the Moronga situation. I'll talk about the Piedmont situation where you had a school that was not safe, but because it didn't hit the bright line of the number, it didn't qualify. So I truly believe if a school is not safe to be occupied by students, and we concur with that based on evaluative criteria. And what we were told at the meeting was that you have to, after you take your 10,000-foot look at the state and the geological surveys and everything else, you have to be able to evaluate these on a school-by-school basis because the factors that apply to each school oftentimes are unique. So what we want you to do is have your experts use their best judgment. If they concur, we want they concur that the danger is a result of seismic, and then it would qualify for the program. If they don't concur, then it won't qualify.
Okay, Mr. Harvey and then Mr. Hagman.
If I may, I would ask you to take a look at subsection C. And the term is, instruction engineer does this report identifying deficiencies, stating why there is a catastrophic collapse in a seismic event. But take a look at what it says. The things that have to be considered are ground shaking, no ceiling, no floor. That's a consideration. Liquefaction, faulting, landsliding, or other identified risks. So, indeed, we have opened up the criteria. We have not set a floor or ceiling for the shake itself, but that's a factor to consider, making, I think, the Assembly member's point that it's a district, school, site-by-site evaluative tool. And then, as Ms. Green has suggested, all of that has to be concurred in by DSA, and they're going to develop policies that are based on some objective criteria, whether it is ASCE 31 alone or that and the addition that we hear on 41. So that's how I think we saw it working. The ground shaking was a factor, but it wasn't a single factor with a intensity attached to it. Is that fair?
Right, it wasn't the sole one criteria, but not the sole.
Mr. Ferguson.
My thinking on that is that at the end of the day, the state architect would adopt similar criteria to what we have in front of us for the same purpose of determining their concurrence. It'd be one and the same as adopting it as the criteria for the program from the board's perspective or from the state architect's perspective.
I don't think so, because, again, I submit my report to the DSA that says the school is not safe. And your architects look at it, and they may say, okay, it misses the ground shaking by, 0.02. However, when you take a look at the building type and everything else, we concur with the architect that these buildings aren't safe to be occupied by kids. Under the current program, you wouldn't qualify. Under our criteria, you would. And that's why I believe you do need to take a look at the unique each school and its own conditions in terms of the type of construction and all the factors that are unique to that site where the school is constructed.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, if I can just add that I think that's a fair characterization of what Assembly Member Buchanan mentioned there, that you'd have more of a customized approach to looking at these sites, but again, if you don't lose sight of the fact that you could have a building come in at 1.0 spectral acceleration or lower, and you could have a building type that's a weaker category, not identified, not recommended by the Seismic Safety Commission, not recommended by DSA, come in under this threshold criteria because you're in a more subjective era. So we don't lose sight of that. That's what we're losing here.
Thanks. Well, kind of back to the original statement I made earlier, is we have certain criteria to kind of give a guideline. Okay, the state's so big and everything else. We have this problem of putting everything in a category or the other. But what we did, like in Morongo's case, is they came back and said, look, we don't fit your category. Staff was able to fund it anyway because it was a health and safety issue based on other criteria that wasn't seismic. There is kind of like this artificial appeal process that gives hopefully thinking people the ability to look at the totality of everything without necessarily opening up the floodgates for anybody. We're looking at the worst of the worst. We're trying to do that right now. If we just, we're okay to drop it down one notch, I'm fine with that. Open it up, change the 2A buildings, give a little more. But you're dealing with staff and you're dealing with people like 10 people down the chain who's going to read this code, and if you leave it open-ended and you get anybody who basically signs a document that says your school may be at risk because of an earthquake, then that opens up them to the school board and everybody else. Look, is this really that? And you're going to have someone make some criteria to begin with to say, is this automatic? Yeah, we put it on consent, it fits, or no, this is something that we have a question. That's what this board's for. That's what we got staff for. We can call witnesses and we can bring our own experts in to say it doesn't quite fit our criteria, but we do see this as an exception because of all the mitigating circumstances. Just like we already have. We did it. Why can't we continue on that path? Give those school districts who have concern, who want to change it, they're screaming at us, say we need money for this, let them have some kind of process to appeal that to us, but we'll look at case-by-case basis. I think that's what you're trying to say anyway, but once you put that in hardcore language, as it gets put down to the different levels of the district, that's when we have problems with the interpretation of that, versus someone like Morongo who put the time and effort, who basically banged their head against the wall several times and said, we couldn't fit your criteria, but we know it's unsafe, we move our kids out. They still came to us, we appealed it, we were able to give them the money, they're off, hopefully go build.
We didn't give them seismic money, I have to.
But we still got them money for it.
Right.
And then I think we have, what's the cash management, we can look at it later.
What list of schools are waiting to get money? That's the problem, is you don't have schools applying because if they have buildings that are unsafe and they don't hit that
but your
exact
premise
number.
was if it's unsafe, they need the kids out of there, they're probably letting somebody know we need more money to build a new school because they already moved kids out of there.
But the question is if they're doing that because of a seismic condition, will they qualify for seismic dollars? And we don't have...
Wait, before you leave, who's that Coke for? Not me.
We've been 5 years to do this program. We haven't done anything.
Oh,
Sorry.
and somebody just turned it upside down, so watch out. Your attorney, yeah.
I'm sorry, I apologize. It's just... Ms. Hancock.
Okay, let me try to work with the motion for just a minute, because if I appreciate the Department of Finance wants us to stick with the scientific recommendations that we got, so if we added an E to it that said reduce the shaking factor to 1.60 from the 1.68, that would fit within your criteria, yes? And then we have the Category 2 construction type as defined by AB 300.
Which you already have an A.
Yes, which we have an A. Would we need to add the RM1 building type and the C2A building type, or are they in there now?
They would be included in A.
Okay, so they're in there now. So then we have those two factors that were of concern to finance. And then it would seem to me that the other two would be all right the way they are. If we added especially a catastrophic collapse in a seismic event,
And you said the intern housing, whatever you called it, right?
And
The second part.
and then DSA concurrence with an engineering report, right? So that if we move those four things and directed the staff to return to the committee with conforming regulatory amendments, to that, I would want to add, including what I'm calling an incremental option, but I don't know if that's correct, an incremental option to take care of smaller projects such as ceiling tiles and lamp.
Voluntary seismic?
Yeah.
Want to tell me, explain to us what that is, please?
If I could clarify, the incremental option I referred to is an incremental lowering of the spectral acceleration
That's what I
rate.
thought.
So we're from 1.60 to 1.57 to 1.
That's what we would recommend, every 6 months that it be reduced.
Okay.
Well, I don't know that I think
Voluntary incremental seismic.
Yes.
Senator Hancock, can I ask a question? Do you believe the school in Piedmont should have been able to qualify for seismic funds?
I think that if we do these kinds of things, it probably would have.
It would not have. It would not have. When they testified, they actually had a seismic, and they may be here, but their spectral acceleration was actually higher than that. And under this, they would not have been able to qualify because
Even with the addition of the
That's
building
exactly
type.
right, because we're substituting a number for the analysis of professional experts, engineers, that are telling us whether or not a school is safe to be occupied by kids. And then you put school boards in a very awkward situation because they have engineers that tell them they don't, but we're setting a bright line. So if we have, if you think about the Moronga situation, which was clear to all of us when you took a look at it, and DSA even concurred, I mean, you have to ask yourself if that is the criteria you want, or if you want to rely on engineering experts and allowing them to take a look at the conditions specific to a school and the site.
Mr. Ferguson, you had a comment on that?
Yeah, if I could clarify. The Piedmont school didn't qualify because it was a wood frame construction type school. Under the proposal today, it would qualify. That would be an additional Category 2 construction type that would qualify for the funding. I'd also like to point out on the Morongo issue that the division of the state architect did not provide state-level concurrence because they stated that it was not an imminent threat of collapse. And that was presented before the board. So under that criteria, they would not have qualified.
My recollection is that they concurred, but because the building type was built at the standards at the time it was constructed, they didn't qualify. Was that? Yeah.
That's my recollection.
Mr. Hagman, I was just going to ask staff, is there, for these exceptions that we see, the ones that, if we do this one jump down, have some kind of bright line, this for starters, and you get a compelling case for someone who maybe not fit every category, but the totality of it looks like it's immediate catastrophic danger, is there a way to get funds under the health and safety part of it to them, and how would you go about doing that? And how would you go to bring that to us to make a decision?
Under the current criteria, you can file an appeal if you don't fit the boxes as correct, and that's the case what Morongo did. They didn't qualify for the seismic program, but they did qualify in the facility hardship. So it was a different pot of funds in which they qualified for it.
Ms. Green?
Chris, are you saying that it's an or situation?
That's what we would prefer, that you have this, and for the exceptions, they appeal to the board for the board's consideration.
But are you saying it's spectral acceleration or Category 2?
And it's a combination of both.
That's not what you just said in your example.
If I may, since I'm the maker of the motion, politely, Senator Hancock, I'm going to try our motion first, and if it does not pass, I think then it's time for someone else to make a motion. Ours was A through F.
which was inclusive of allowing interim housing was E, and directing conforming regulations was F, which means, Senator Hancock, I'm not accepting your amendments. And I'd like to, and it's been seconded, so if we take the vote on that, and then if that does not pass, I would defer to you.
Well, it's been moved and second, and there can always be an alternate motion. Ms. Brownlee?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what your motion was.
As recommended here.
It's A, B, C, D, and D as it's printed, with E, the interim housing, and F, the conforming regulations.
Yes.
Correct, but there were two other changes, and so I'll go over them again.
Okay, and what part of Ms. Hancock's motion are you not accepting?
That motion does not include reducing the spectral acceleration from 168 to 160, and it does not include the voluntary incremental seismic upgrades, which are what you were speaking to, correct?
That's right.
And the reference to AC 41?
Well, I didn't know where that was that's not in the recommendations.
Okay. All right.
And I just had one question before we vote. And I'm sorry, I think I came in late, but I think I'm up to speed now on what the conversation has been. But for a structural engineer, is there a particular type of engineer that's certified for earthquake evaluations, or just any structural engineer is qualified to do that?
Basically, as far as the state's concerned, any structural engineer.
Any structural engineer?
A geoscientist that specializes in seismology or seismicity is a different branch that's not structural engineering necessarily, but the people that design schools and are tasked with taking those schools to the division of the state architect for approval are licensed structural engineers in the state of California, and there's not levels of structural engineering.
Thank you.
Okay, before we move any further, can I hear from the public if anybody has any comments? Yes.
Could I make one point of clarification?
Yes.
In that alternate motion that Ms. Moore mentioned, the interim housing, which would be E, it's already in number 2, recommendation number 2, and F is already in number 3. So they're already there, just so we don't get confused.
My preference would be to bifurcate it, but that's not what she wants to do. So that is her motion, is to go A through F. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members, Tom Duffy for the Coalition for Adequate School Housing. We are in support of this motion. We were very pleased that the 3 members of the subcommittee came to agreement on largely what was here and what has been presented here. There has been, as has been noted, about a 5-year struggle to try to have this program initiated. I think what is proposed will energize this program and will make it a comprehensive program for dealing with seismic issues in California. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, anybody else? Yes.
Good evening, members of the board. Matt Peller with School Facility Consultants. Real quickly, there was a discussion earlier about not having a list of districts lined up waiting, and that's largely true, but there is a small list in that there's one district, West Contra Costa Unified School District, that received a conceptual approval, but that conceptual approval hasn't guaranteed that project funding. The district has, I think, wants the program opened up and sees the need for that, but wants to make sure that their funding is protected, in essence, that other projects that may be less vulnerable aren't able to get the funding ahead of that project that's already been conceptually approved at the higher, for lack of a better word, criteria. Thank you.
Can I ask a question on that?
Ms. Hancock.
Yeah, well, my understanding is that there actually is a number of programs in the pipeline right now, including West Contra Costa, but others that would use about $99 million of the $199 million. So and I'm assuming those would all stay in the queue and they would be ahead of whatever else happens?
Not at this point. That was an earlier recommendation of the seismic subcommittee. There was no recommendation out of the committee on that, but that was one of the proposals, to set aside funding for all the known universe of the 21 new ones that we've recognized. but that is not something before us today.
Well, that's of concern to me, because I really did think that that all those projects that have been approved to be in the pipeline were going to move forward.
I don't believe that the projects you've identified are approved. The list you gave me, as I recall, and please correct me, was that these are potential, but these projects still have to do their engineering reports, apply, and everything else.
That is correct.
Now, your project may be different, but the list to which you refer was list of schools that, if they want, that wouldn't even know for definitely that they qualify yet. The list of schools that they could, if they went forward, they might qualify if they did all their engineering reports and everything else. But that list that's not a list of projects that have already been approved that meet the criteria and that are ready to be funded. I believe there were a couple projects that fell into your category.
West Contra Costa does have a conceptual approval. They meet all criteria, and they've come in and they have received board approval. No apportionment, nothing else, but a conceptual approval.
And I would
the other 21 have been preliminarily qualified.
And I would expect that projects like yours would continue to stay on the list. But for other projects, we have no idea, what the scope of those projects are at all, which is why we weren't dealing with those specifically, because they still have to do all their work and move forward and get approval.
Okay, I thought they were all in the same position as West Contra Costa.
West Contra Costa, if I could clarify, is in the same position as several other facility hardship conceptual approvals. The board has granted a conceptual approval, meaning that they meet the criteria for a facility hardship, but there is no reservation of bond authority for those projects. Right. West Contra Costa is included. They still have to go out and get the plans approved. When they come in and submit a funding application, at that point, if there is remaining bond authority, they would get that reserved.
What would happen? Excuse me. So what would have to happen is that other projects, if the board approved the action today, other projects would have to get through DSA before Contra Costa, $193 million worth would have to get through DSA before Contra Costa would. And in order, if we want to address that potentiality, we could add G, that Contra Costa's conceptual approval is ahead of all other approvals.
There's something the committee asked us to explore reservation of authority for these projects. We did take a look at the program. We did consult with legal counsel. We cannot, according to our legal counsel, reserve authority at the conceptual stage because it's in advance of plan approval. That's why we had created a system that we had before the committee to try and establish that, keeping in mind how much money we're approving up front and having that money available whenever the projects go through the planning approval stages and submit an application. That process was not acted on by the committee, but it was what our legal counsel opined that we would have to do to be able to do what you're suggesting, Ms. Moore.
You described West Contra Costa School District or whatever as hardship money.
Facility hardship.
Facility hardship. Well, that's a different pot of money, right?
Yeah. Right. Just to clarify, it's not facility hardship, it's seismic. And it is a conceptual approval, and I agree with Juan. I guess the way I would differentiate it from the facility hardship conceptual approvals is there's no contemplation of changing the criteria for the facility hardship, but there is on the seismic. And so again, the concern is that one could argue that this project is a more vulnerable project given that it meets the more stringent criteria. And the concern would be if other projects, they may not have to go through DSA, they may already be through DSA and they're just waiting for a change in the regulation, would jump ahead of that project in terms of being able to access the funding.
Sorry to belabor the point, Mr. Chair, but I'm still concerned. Is there a way, maybe we just look at this all wrong, and is there a way to use seismic money on hardship cases or appeal cases when brought to us that don't fit current criteria? Can we or can we not do any kind of like Morongo but actually use the right pot of money, so to say?
The bond acts actually designate a certain dollar amount for seismic mitigation. So
it's used for that purpose.
For seismic mitigation, right.
So, back to our case example of Morongo, they did not currently qualify in the current criteria that the regulation stated, but they were appealing for seismic upgrades. Could we, even though they didn't fit our regulation, through an appeal process that's voted on, and they made a case to it, could we use seismic dollars for that project? I know we did it in this case, we went to a different pot of money, but since it was seismic upgrade, could we do it that way?
The Bond Act doesn't give us authority to be able to move from one designated pot to another. So in this case, we have money set aside for facility hardship separate from seismic mitigation. And in that case, I believe it was Morongo, we used facility hardship funds rather than the seismic
mitigation. But could we have, if we took that action? Because what we're doing is setting an arbitrary criteria to say who qualifies, who's the most needy, and we're trying to deliberate that. If we determine this school or a school is seismic need, even though it doesn't fit current criteria, through an appeal process, can we use seismic money?
We're still going to need criteria to determine who falls under seismic mitigation.
That's why we're going under this process now, because the problem is we've been in effect, we keep beating this dead horse, but for 5 years, trying to set these numbers, and schools that we know are not safe are not qualifying. And they can appeal, but then we've got to be able to fit them into another program.
Okay, so we have a motion, a second. I think we've had a little bit of conversation on this. I'm just going to say I would have preferred that we split the issue because I have concerns about using interim housing in this scenario.
So do I, and as a result, I'm going to offer a substitute motion which would have us vote sequentially and separately on 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
I'll accept that.
Okay. So, as a move of the motion, you remove your initial motion then, and go with the taking into consideration. You seconded the second. Split it, bifurcate it. Thank you. Okay. She seconded. Okay, so let's move for that. Call the roll on item number 1 to accept A through D with the amendments spoken to, crossing out listed, and including in seismic event. All in favor, say aye. Or call the roll. You want to call the roll on this one? Okay. Call the roll.
Senator Hancock. Senator Renner. Assemblymember Brownlee. Assemblymember Buchanan. Assemblymember Hagman. Scott Harvey. Kathleen Moore.
Aye.
Lynn Green.
Aye.
Pedro Reyes.
No.
Carries.
Thank you. Item 2, additional allowance for interim housing, as recommended by the committee, and I've made my comment on that. Call the roll. Mr. Harvey?
You made your comment.
Okay. Okay. So we don't have to take another motion because the motion was to take them one at a time. So thank you. Call the roll.
Senator Hancock.
I'm not sure what the second motion is. Interim housing.
Interim housing for, to include interim housing in the funding, or funding for interim housing.
Okay.
And we have not done that before.
Right, I understand that, and I'm not voting on that.
Okay. Senator Renner.
Not voting.
Okay. Assemblymember Brownlee.
Aye.
Assemblymember Buchanan.
Aye.
Assemblymember Hagman.
No.
Scott Harvey.
No.
Kathleen Moore.
Aye.
Lynn Green.
Aye.
Pedro Reyes.
No.
Doesn't carry.
Thank you. And then the committee recommendations are approved, so the committee will come up with regulatory amendments to come up with provision 1 then. Is that?
Vote on 3.
Yeah, I'm just clarifying what it does. It's 1 through D then. Call the roll, please.
Senator Hancock. Senator Renner.
Aye.
Assemblymember Brownlee.
Aye.
Assemblymember Buchanan.
Aye.
Assemblymember Hagman. Scott Harvey.
Aye.
Kathleen Moore. Lynn Green. Aye. Peter Reyes.
Procedural, aye. Okay.
And Hancock, aye as well.
Thank you. I want to publicly thank the committee for all the work they did. This is a lot of work, a lot of heavy lifting that took place. I don't think everybody's happy with the outcome, but there was a lot of
I
work.
just wanted to make one additional motion
Yes.
since we're making all these motions.
Ms. Hancock.
And that would be...
Ms. Hancock has the motion, please.
To add the voluntary incremental upgrade option when they come back with regulations for us.
And could you define the incremental upgrade just so that everybody's clear?
Well, what I'm thinking is that it's for smaller, focused projects that may not involve completely rebuilding or remodernizing. And you could even say such as light fixtures, etc. And if staff has a better way to word that, could you do that?
DSA has proposed, and they will be working on more specific guidelines for how it works procedurally, but in essence, the way it would work would be an incremental approach where you do not exceed the 50% of the current replacement value of a building, in which if they don't cross that threshold, then they can, in essence, the details to be worked out by DSA, avoid, in some cases, not meeting all the building code requirements to bring it up to current building code requirements, whatever that would be, based on the age of the building. So they could voluntarily shrink the size of their project and just go in and deal with
Zone in on the
seismic
actual need.
repair needs. Yes.
Second. Moved in second, Mr. Harvey.
Do we need a motion? I mean, do you want them to bring that back as an item for the
I
agenda?
want to make sure that it gets included in the regulatory, and it was not included, and when it was proposed to be included, it was not accepted as an amendment. So we do want to put it in as a motion.
All right.
So it's been moved in second. Mr. Harvey, you have a question? No?
No, you've clarified for me what we're doing.
Okay, so do we need to call the roll, or? Call the roll. Okay.
Senator Hancock.
Aye.
Senator Runner. Aye. Assemblymember Browning. Assemblymember Brownlee?
Abstain.
Okay, sorry. Assemblymember Buchanan? Assemblymember Hagman? Scott Harvey? Kathleen Moore? Lynn Green? Peter Reyes?
Aye.
Does not carry.
Thank you.
Okay, I have one more motion I'd like to try. I've been told, and I cannot say that I fully understand the reasons, that under what we just voted on, West Contra Costa is left out of the protection, and unless there is a specific wording about their conceptual approval remaining and keeping them on the list, they could, in fact, be dropped as a result of this motion that we've just made, and I don't know if their consultant is still here, and if he could comment on
Can we just make a motion that whatever we do causes no harm, no foul to whoever's already on the list? Is that fair? Do we need, is that enough clarification for staff?
I believe our issue, Mr. Chairman, is at this point, we can't give them a reservation of funds until we actually have an application that's approved and all the steps are through. If we do that, then it is actually an apportionment. And we can't do an apportionment without going through those steps. And that's what's preventing us from being able to reserve specific dollar amounts for that project.
If I may, I guess a question or maybe a way to get there is could the regulations or the criteria be set up where the criteria protects them, not a reservation of funds? So you're not actually reserving the funds, but the criteria in such a way where they qualify ahead of other projects. Just trying to look for an angle, again, under the spirit of being able to...
How long will it take you to get your stuff done?
Yeah, they anticipate being out of DSA in the next three months. So the hope is that they'll be there.
Regulations?
Yeah.
6 to 9 months.
6 to 9 months?
Who knows?
Yeah, so,
So it may get done before the new regulations take
That
place,
is possible.
right?
Yes.
So now you have incentive to get it done in the next 3 months.
That's correct. Well, we appreciate your help with DSA on that process as well. So.
And if it takes 6 or 9 months before the new codes come in, then they should be...
They're fine.
Mr. Lynn, please.
They're good.
No, I think as far as a conceptual approval, they have actually 18 months to come in with their project. So, again, the goal is to move along quite fast, and they have the criteria already established for them. It's just when they come in for funding, again, the goal is to accelerate those projects coming through the door. So
Agreed, yeah. The district is hopeful it's not an issue. They don't anticipate taking the 18 months that they were providing the conceptual approval. Again, just the concept is there that they could get skipped over, so I wanted to make sure that was...
Yes? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Another easy one. Priorities and funding. We can do this in 3 minutes flat.
Tab 13, beginning on page 167. Mr. Chair, is a report from the Committee on Priorities and Funding / Cash Management, and to provide recommendations on 3 separate issues. The first dealing with fiscal crisis regulations, second dealing with remaining bond authority, and the third is how to make apportionments in the future. The committee met on 4 separate occasions, the last of which was last week on the 17th, and the recommendations are as follows. In terms of the fiscal crisis regulations, the committee recommended to reserve approximately $73.5 million from the next bond sale for charter school facility program projects, for their advanced fund releases for site and design, and to extend the charter school regulations for another year. Basically, the discussion was that charter schools have not been able to access the state funds to get started in terms of getting the designs, getting the plans approved, acquiring land, because they don't have local match. As other school districts that do have local match, they can get started with the projects. So I think the committee was making the suggestions to sort of level the playing field for charter schools. The reservation would be available for 6 months after the cash becomes available. If the cash is not used, then it would be at the discretion of the board to be used for other purposes. Also, once the cash is accessed by charter schools, then the board can then take an action to declare those projects active, meaning that they are going to continue their processing timelines established in regulation. The second issue dealt with...
Hold on, let's deal with this. This is it, right? For the charter schools, this is the only one? Is there a motion to approve this? Mr. Hagman.
Mr. Chair, I just have a question. We're carving out a little bit of money for design money, or design. So what happens upon construction, or if they start constructing and they have to go keep their priority level? How does this process work so they could get...
They're going to get funding for site design to get started. Once they come in and submit a funding application, which means that they've received all the plan approvals, they'll get placed on the unfunded list just like any other project.
But if they've already been in this process since 2005-06 and they're going to be put on the bottom of that list, how do they keep their level, so to speak, because they could be put very low at the bottom of the list at this point, but they've been going through different processes.
This was something that was discussed extensively at the committee, and the idea was to give them the money to get started, but once they get the money to get the plans to acquire the land, then they would be in the same level field as other school districts, and they would be on the unfunded list just like any other school district, which it would be at the bottom of the list depending on when they would come in. I don't know if any of the committee members want to...
I don't know how to make it any better, but I have a concern because they've been working with their own set of rules for all this period of time, and now school districts have been doing their own protocol for all this time, and now they're putting together, they're basically starting from scratch again, and it's not on their fault a lot of times to be in this position 5 years later, so I don't know if there's any other recommendations for it, but I have a problem with it.
There were basically 3 options. One option, status quo, and their 5 years turns into 10 years because they'll never have the money to get going. The one option was to give them the money to get going and move them to the top of the list. And that didn't seem fair that they would get that kind of priority. The middle option was to give them the money to go forward. We have done that already to the tune of about $90 million before, and this was what the whole is right now, and that's how we arrive at less than $80 million. And then they go in on the list like anybody else. That seemed to be the most equitable.
I keep hitting the button. Any kind of application date, right? Everything's done by dates received.
Right.
But you have apples and oranges now, you're trying to make apples. Any way to transfer some of those dates somehow, if they've been in the works? I don't know.
But the problem is that some of them have not been in the works because they didn't have the money. We're now letting them get in the playing field. They've been on the bench the whole time. And so now they actually get a uniform. So they'll have a chance to bat. Public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Moira Top on behalf of the California Charter Schools Association. And first, certainly want to say that we are supportive of the subcommittee action and the action before you. Very much appreciate all of the attention that was paid to it during the subcommittee process and the length of time that you devoted to it. And we do think that the site and acquisition money is, site and design money, excuse me, is important and a good first step. We do have the same concerns that Mr. Hagman made, which are where we were kind of faced with a situation where, as you described, if we went with the one date, it puts charter schools at the top of the list. This potential action then puts them effectively at the bottom of the list. And so I guess what we would like to do is continue to work with you, with your staff, to see if there is some middle ground to be found with respect to making sure that we really do meet, I think, your suggestions, your guidance, your impetus to get shovel-ready projects done. Because essentially, if all we're doing is funding site and design and then putting construction at the very bottom of the list, I don't think we're going to get to the construction that you're hoping to see, at least in a quick fashion. And we think there are truly public or charter schools that will be ready for construction earlier than they are than they would be ready to go at that bottom of the list. It just doesn't seem we were kind of in that all or nothing situation. So again, our request is that we work with your staff to see if there is something else we can come back to you with that maybe is a different proxy for a different date. There are all sorts of dates in this process.
Do you have any idea of what numbers we're talking about? How many sites may be potentially ready at this point? I mean, based if they had funding? Could you go for a bond fund and keep a percentage toward this and to give them 6 months like you do to get started? If not, okay, all bets are off. I mean, you want to get the ones that are most ready to go and are capable of going, and that's what they would be under the old program if we have the funding stream and the mechanics to do it. But since we don't have that, we're mixing them in with another group. But we do want to take those priority ones that have been sitting there waiting to go. So is there a way to do that? Do you see if we pass this now, is there room for that opportunity later to really take a look at that?
We can certainly take a look at that.
If that's the chair and the board's direction, I don't know, on this.
Maybe as a starting point for that, we go back to Proposition 55 projects. They're not the latest, they're not the earliest, and it seems that there may be the bulk of those 55s that have not moved forward to construction to review.
Jim and then Chris?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jim Bush, School Site Solutions. I represent a number of charters, a number of them in the 55 proposition. And I would agree with Ms. Moore. I would think that as money gets returned into the program that you've allocated that maybe is unclaimed, that you could recycle that into construction projects and limit those initially to Prop 55. They have been struggling since 2005 to try to make their projects work, and I don't know how much of the $96 million was actually claimed. I know one round is done and another round is coming up, but probably not all of it was claimed. And I don't know if this $73 million will all be claimed for design and apportionment. And it would seem to me you could recycle that unclaimed money into a pot for construction-ready, maybe just Prop 55 projects. So,
Mr. Ferguson.
Chris Ferguson, Department of Finance. We would support the staff's option as written. In this case, we believe providing funds to charter schools for site and acquisition and design costs would allow those projects to begin to move forward, to move to a phase where they would be able to then construct. Adding them to the unfunded list to compete in priorities and funding, we think is a fair option at this point.
What are your thoughts on the Prop 55 option that Ms. Moore put forward?
We do believe that those projects have been disadvantaged against others. They were unable to move forward since December 18th of 2008. Once the AB 55 was frozen, those loans frozen, they could not proceed until the board recently took action to provide the $96 million. Until that occurred, they could not move forward. Unlike a traditional school district, they don't have access to developer fees or internal borrowing sources to move forward on their own.
Senator Runner and then Mr. Harvey.
Well, I am concerned along with Assemblyman Hagman about the timing. Is there a deadline for Prop 55 funds to be used? And that would be an issue because they'd have the site and design and then be, 14 more months to actually get the building as far as the dates. So I am concerned and wish that the Charter School Association, the other charter schools would continue to meet with the staff and have some kind of firm decision on that.
Mr. Harvey.
I don't want to beat the dead horse, but I too think the suggestion on Prop 55 has merit. Eloquent statement about the disadvantaged situation they have and the fact that I would encourage the association to work with staff. I mean, everyone has the right to do that, and hopefully we'll come back with something that that works.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, with your indulgence. One point of clarification I just wanted to see if we could address, and that is that the motion or the recommendation is that it's reserving the $73.5 million from out of the next bond sale. I assume this is a technical, the presumption is that is for any new monies, including any rescissions that might come, and that it's not specific to bond funds, or is that not true?
Well, we're looking at bond sale. I think that was what the committee was looking at the time. Ms. Silverman, is there a distinction without a difference for this purposes?
No, but I think the issue that's being raised is whether or not the funds that come back from rescissions as a result of those projects not moving forward, whether or not that money could be reserved for additional projects being moved for the charter program.
I think the direction was for you to actively consider that as you work with all of the gathered folk, because Prop 55 had been disadvantaged. It may make sense.
So the Chair will entertain a motion on that then.
Just so I understand, what you're saying is rescissions of all projects, possibly, or charter projects?
Charter only.
So if someone that had actual dollars rescinds, that we reapportion that out to preliminary sites first before, where else would it go?
There was money earmarked for the charter program as a result of the last bond sale. Am I correct, for a priority funding round? Is that
right? So where else could those funds go?
No, if the funds are returned back and those projects didn't perfect in that certain timeline, could that money be used for future charter projects being funded?
What I'm asking is, could it go any other place?
Yes.
It can?
It can be.
So that's a choice of the board?
Potentially any other place.
Okay.
Can I clarify just for me?
Yes, ma'am.
You agree that you want the $73.5 million to be able to allow these projects to go forth planning. I remember at a previous meeting where we said that's the most important for us, more important than construction, because we can't build if we don't have plans or land. So is the motion to approve that now, and then we want to come back at another meeting with what other options might be to get funding? Okay,
Yes.
so we have one motion, and the other is just direction for staff. Okay.
I think the motion also include direction that if there's money from the set-aside from last bond sale that came back from charter schools, that could go forward, not necessarily waiting for the sale.
They're going to bring those options back to us at the next meeting, I assume.
There was a request, and I think Ms. Moore was supporting of an issue of allowing some of the Prop 55 money that's available to be made available for construction in those cases. So those items move to the top of the line on Prop 55.
I was not supporting that at this meeting.
Okay.
I was saying that that's the second phase, bring back the ideas to the board, because I don't think we know the universe. I think we need more data to make an informed decision there.
But the board is open for that, so,
Right.
and we want to do that sooner rather than later. Staff recommendation then. Okay, is there a second? Second. Been second?
Senator Hancock?
Aye.
Senator Runner?
Aye.
Assemblymember Brownlee?
Aye.
Assemblymember Buchanan?
Aye.
Assemblymember Hagman?
Aye.
Scott Harvey?
Aye.
Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
Lynn Green?
Aye.
Pedro Reyes?
Aye.
Carries.
Second recommendation is not to mess with the bond authority. We'll leave that alone. Go ahead.
We have, before that, we have the recommendations regarding the critically overcrowded schools fiscal crisis regulations. The recommendation from the committee was to remove the inactive status and consider all those projects to be active. That affects, this is on, I'm sorry, page 168. It affects the 33 remaining inactive critically overcrowded schools projects, and they would have about 10 months to convert, meaning that they have to get plans approved by DSA and CDE and submit them to our office to be able to meet the statutory requirements for the program. So the committee recommended to remove the inactive status for those fiscal crisis regulations.
I'll move the committee recommendation.
Remove, second? Second. Second. Call the roll.
Senator Hancock?
Aye.
Senator Runner?
Aye.
Assemblymember Brownlee?
Aye.
Assemblymember Buchanan? Assemblymember Hagman? Scott Harvey?
Aye.
Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
Lynn Green? Pedro Reyes?
Aye.
Carries.
The last recommendation as far as the fiscal crisis regs was to recommend, the committee obviously had a lot of dialogue related to the recommendation of establishing a re-review period for financial hardship projects sitting on the unfunded list. And with that, the committee did recommend to allow the current financial hardship regulations to become inactive as of July 1st. Also approve a process in which the financial hardship re-reviews would be instituted for the period effective July 1st, 2011, and for those projects that are limited to on the unfunded list, added to the list as of February 25th, 2009 to June 30th, 2011. I believe the conversation was trying to create a bright line test as far as when the re-review of financial information would be in effect. So we did give an example as far as if a project was added on the unfunded list effective in January 2011, and the board did have the ability to fund a project as of November 1st, what is the timeline in which we would be reviewing financial information? And I believe it was really clear at that point in time at the discussion that a review of your financials would only be in effect from July 1st moving forward. So those projects that were sitting on the unfunded list for more than 6 months, that prior funds prior to that date would not be included in the review. So with that, we're bringing forward the recommendations of the subcommittee. Is there any questions?
I would like to move a change in the recommendation and to have it read, allow the current financial hardship re-review regulations to remain in effect until July 1st, 2012.
Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second that.
Ms. Brownlee seconds. Any comments? There's a mic, there's a chair, take it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dave Walrath, representing Small School Districts Association. We're still in fiscal crisis. We still have huge inter-year deferrals. We're speaking in favor of Ms. Green's motion to retain the current regulation through July 1/12. We're making this request because the current provisions give certainty to school districts. They know what they owe. If you reopen, then you have uncertainty. And in this period of fiscal crisis that we are facing at the local level, from the deferrals and everything else, not really sure what our budget is going to look like next year, whether there will or will not be tax extensions. We need certainty for planning purposes. So we're asking that you adopt this motion because it will provide us certainty on what is the contribution from the local district for the project so they can continue whatever planning they have been doing without changing the rules midstream prior to funding. Thank you.
Ana Ferreira, on behalf of the County School Facilities Consortium. I think we've been in that very same spot throughout this discussion. The county CSFC is just believes that the emergency situation that we were in before, we're still in now, and there's not funding flowing from AB 55, and we're just very, very concerned that any change would cause more problems, and for all the reasons Dave Walrath just stated. So we would be very much in support of the Green proposal.
Okay. Thank you. Richard Gonzalez of Richard Gonzalez and Associates. I'm not going to speak to the points that they've presented. But if you choose to go with the original recommendation by the staff, I would recommend that be at least one clarification be made. If I'm a financial hardship school district and I have one project that's currently on the unfunded list, as you have shared in the subcommittee, Mr. Reyes, it would be grandfathered in through July 1st, 2011. Okay? But if the district comes in with a subsequent application after that point, while that one is still on the list, these regulations say that the district will be subject to a re-review, and that means local matching requirement on that project that may be on the unfunded list has now been changed. So my recommendation would be, or ask that you consider, that the requirements for a local match on the project that's currently on the unfunded list would not be altered as a result of having done a re-review of the financial hardship, that re-review would only impact the new project that came on board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Harvey.
I support the committee's action for the following reason. I think the action recognizes that there is a continuing fiscal crisis. But what it says is we're going to pick a proper time to reinstitute the review, because if you have money to put into a project, you no longer are a financial hardship district, you probably should put the money in. Alternatively, if you're a district which over time now is a financial hardship district, you should have the opportunity for that review and to qualify for the 100% financing. I think we had a very robust discussion about equity and fairness, and it was the committee's recommendation to endorse this process where you pick a time and the re-review start at that point in time, because at some point, out of equity for all of California's school districts, you should be rewarding by 100% financing those that are truly hardship, and those that have dollars to commit to a project should. So I'm voting against the substitute motion.
I just get clear that when we looked at this, the intent was not to penalize any districts for that time period and to extend it and move forward. So could I just get clarification on the rationale to make it January or July 1, 2012 instead of July 1, 2011?
This was the very first issue on my very first board meeting. And financial hardship is one of the areas that small school districts have a very hard time with re-review, because it involves an enormous amount of effort for them. My concern at this point with this specific one is that financial hardship is sitting on a list through no fault of its own, and we're picking some arbitrary date to determine at this time that you still are financial hardship. It penalizes the planning process that the school district has sat through and held on to their money in order to encumber what they need. They've already got it. It's encumbered, and it was explained to me in briefing that by being encumbered, it doesn't count. But the real question is, this is a special category. It's always been a special category. And so my concern is, you can't turn around to a district that's been planning and sitting for 3 years and say, oh, by the way, these 4 months, now you either owe us money or, as Lisa said, you qualify for even more. The number that would qualify for more would probably be less than the number that would be penalized. That's my concern.
July 12th. So July 12th moves it up 1 year.
For reconsideration again, because it'll come back in a year.
Okay. And because it seems to me you're almost arguing for a complete change in the regulations regarding financial hardship, but at a minimum you want to extend it a year.
Since we're playing a time game, these were dates.
Right.
I'm sticking to that game.
Okay.
I guess my concern is that the enormous effort involved, it's going to be enormous effort at any time, whether you do it July of 2012 or 2011. Both days are arbitrary from my perspective. I think what we're trying to do is say you have a 6-month look back, and anything that happens pre-July 1st of 2011 is grandfathered in. So it's only stuff that really, when you do a 6-month look back, is the stuff that happens after the January of 2012. And at some point, we have to look back. I mean, it's sort of if you qualify for financial aid, and but you take a year of leave, or don't take your admission for the following year. Well, you still ought to be applying for financial aid. It shouldn't be because you qualify then, you should always eligible. You may have greater need. You may have less need. So I think the interest is to do and apply this 6-month look-back this in statute. So that's the kind of the logic of the committee.
Mr. Chairman, just from a practical perspective, if simply all we do with the regulations is push that back a year to as it's set right now, it's going to sunset on July 1, which means the only way we're going to prevent it from sunsetting is if I understand correctly, is going through emergency regulations to get it in place in time. That might possibly be a problem for us, establishing that there's an emergency to change that date.
So
under the other plan, basically we're letting it sunset, but we're just setting a date. This is the date we're going to establish. We're looking at financials.
But nothing is sunset, so we have this 6-month look back.
Correct.
Okay.
So the only problem we have is if we approve the substitute motion, then we have a hard time getting that into the...
We'll have to do it, yeah. It becomes an emergency regulation and trying to get that through.
I think that's how it went before as well, as I recall, because...
I believe you're correct. I think it was an emergency.
It was because we did not address hardship in the original emergency regulations around the fiscal crisis, so we had the same situation previously. So it's not unusual to this program.
I just bring it up in the light of our most recent regulations.
Okay. So staff recommendation, we have a motion to do it 2012, and that would require regulations, emergency regs. That would... Okay. All right. Is there a second? Is there a substitute? Yes, you second that. Okay. Ms. Brownlee seconds. Any comments from the public on this? You got them already. Sorry. All right. We have a vote. I think the chair's option preference would be to let him sunset on 2011.
That's mine as well.
Okay. Take the vote, please.
Senator Hancock?
Aye.
Senator Runner?
Aye.
Assemblymember Brownlee? Aye. Assemblymember Buchanan?
To extend it to...
We're basically asking staff to go and extend these regulations to 2012, July of 2012. as opposed to let them sunset, which is what the committee worked on.
Assemblymember Hagman? Scott Harvey?
No.
Kathleen Moore? Lynn Green? Perez?
No.
Doesn't carry.
Thank you.
What's the vote?
4-4.
4 ayes, 4 noes.
And we need
Six. Okay.
I would move the committee recommendation.
I have an amendment then. If we're going to move committee recommendation, because I think there's not clarity from what the board, the subcommittee recommended, and that was that the re-review was only to start on July 1st, meaning, as you said, Pedro, that anything up until July 1st is grandfathered, correct?
Right.
So how it reads right now is that there would be a re-review for projects beginning that are on the list as of February 25th through June 30th, with only the date after July 1st, the adjustment would be considered. So you could be asking for financials back to 2009. Is that correct?
No.
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 Okay, so tell me how that works.
If you look at page 186K, there's
Yes.
actually the regulations of 186K. K.
186K, attachment F.
Tell me how it works then.
Again, it's just qualifying that if you are an older project sitting on the list, that we would only review the district's fund activity on or after July 1st, 2011, and consider any calculations or adjustments to the district's matching share.
But the first sentence says, a project added to the unfunded list will, okay. The first sentence is, no, excuse me.
New projects.
Okay. All right. So I'm a project that came in February 25th, 2009. How do you treat me?
You're an older project. I will look at your updated funds from July 1st, 2011, prospectively. I would not be looking back at your prior funds.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So Mr. Harvey moves. Is there a second on that? Ms. Buchanan seconds. Yes, sir.
Richard Gonzalez again, of Richard Gonzalez and Associates. I was under the impression that part of the discussion in the subcommittee was that the review would not exceed a 6-month window prior to the point of re-review.
The look back is only for 6 months.
That's not reflected in the regulations as I read them from the copy I have.
That's in statute, is 180 days is what the look back is in statute.
I understand, but the revised language, sir, that's in here, as Ms. Moore was starting to read, there's no references to a limit of 6 months.
If the district submits form within 180 days of the OPC, I'm looking at F.
Right.
That doesn't change.
Okay, 180 days.
That's 6 months.
6 months, all right, thank you.
But that was not changed by anybody.
Apologize.
So we didn't touch it.
Sorry.
Anna Ferreira, on behalf of the County Schools Facility Consortium, we would just ask that there would be language that would clarify that it's not just a look, that the fund, when you look at G on 186K, and it says only on the district's fund activity, that's not the language that is being used in A, where you're talking about financial records and that sort of thing. I did have some language that I wanted to provide, but I think if there could be something more clarifying on how far back you can actually look at the financial records rather than fund activity, and we'd be happy to work with staff to provide that language.
work with staff. I mean, I look at F as saying 180 calendar days. That's what the statute says. A look back of 180 days.
And as long as we can clarify that it isn't a review prior to that and that it's only going forward, we're okay with that.
I guess it's getting late, but I look at this as the entirety. I don't view it as one paragraph at a time, so I look at F and it says 180 days. G is clarifying how far back you can look. Unless I'm missing something, that's sort of how I would apply this regulation. So I think but staff, you guys can think that this needs clarity for folks.
I'm just concerned about the language that's used that isn't, as long as we can make it uniform with Section A, I think is what we would be very concerned about. And I'm not sure what fund activity means in G.
So you're looking at 3.
I'm looking at G.
G, but you're also looking at 3, though. That's your 180-day issue.
No, she's not. She's just looking. No, that was another issue.
Okay.
I hear you're saying in A, it reflects the financial records.
Right.
On the second sentence, we can say that the districts only review the district's financial records on or after. Does that help?
And then just to make sure that it's going forward, that's...
Mr. Chairman, it sounds like the issue is just that word fund activity, and so substituting those words with financial records.
Okay. That takes care of it?
I will accept that change in my motion. It reads financial records. Lance, where is the actual language?
In Section G, there at the bottom of 186K, the sentence is for projects added to the unfunded list between February and June. Only the districts, and the original word was fund activity, and I believe that's what we found was a little bit vague, and changing fund activity to financial records on or after July 1st, 2011 will be considered in calculating.
She said that would work. I'll accept that.
Yes.
Thank you.
And we're happy to work with staff on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a motion. Was it Sue second? Roll call. Any more comments from anybody? Thank you.
I'm sorry, Senator Hancock?
Aye.
Senator Runner?
Aye.
Assemblymember Brownlee? Assemblymember Buchanan? Assemblymember Hagman? Scott Harvey?
Aye.
Kathleen Moore? Lynn Green? Pedro Reyes?
Aye.
Carries.
Thank you. Okay. We have the room for another 12 minutes. We have informational items, but we took care of a lot of discussion issues.
We actually have...
One more, Mr. Mireles.
Two more.
Yes, one more.
Now, the next one is transfer of bond authority. The committee recommended that there be no transfer of bond authority at this point.
Move that recommendation.
Okay. And then
Vote.
Unless there's an objection, it will be unanimous. Okay.
Okay, the last one is on cash management. There was strong support.
Second.
Okay.
The staff recommendation moved in second. Comments?
Thank you, Lyle Smoot, LA Unified. One last time, hopefully. This is to ask that you not stop the certification period. In other words, this says start them on July 13th and go for 30 days. The 30-day requirement was something you did because, you wanted to shut them off and get the money out. There's no need to do that. And so, number one, I'd ask you to just not stop it. Just say you can certify anytime you want to after starting July 13th. Amongst other things, this process, if you don't do something like that, requires you to recertify every 6 months, and it also creates some unintended consequences, because if you certify in the first 30 days in January, July, whatever, and then you get a bond sale in November or December, even though you would have been glad to certify in September, you'd be locked out. So I just ask that you open it July 13th, just don't end it, and the certification's good until it's funded, period.
Mr. Sheriff, if I may, we need to have a filing date, because we need to know how many applications are received, how many certifications, to be able to match that with the bond sale.
I concur with the need for the timeline. It's been moved in second. Call the roll, please.
Senator Hancock.
Aye.
Senator Runner.
Aye.
Assemblymember Brownlee. Assemblymember Buchanan. Assemblymember Hagman. Scott Harvey. Kathleen Moore. Lynn Green. Peter Reyes.
Aye.
Carries.
Thank you. Okay.
The subsequent tabs are reports, just
They're all reports. Mr. Move acceptance of the report. Mr. Hagman, you actually requested item 15. Okay, thank you. And then you have on tab 16 the tentative workload. You have meeting dates. Do point out that on page 226, the July 27th, we were not going to have a quorum, so we moved it, and we moved it early because we're going to be doing some workload stuff, staff, the position issues, and then we're going to have a light workload, but we'll take care of some issues there. And then you have the usual stuff on the back, and thank you, everybody, for playing. Good night. I'm sorry?
closed session? No closed session.
No closed session. Thank you. Any public comment? Thank you. Meeting adjourned.